Hi there, this is Chris from PC Gamer. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Before we get started, I just wanted to warn you that there is a few audio issues later on my microphone. There's a hardware problem, so not something we could fix after the fact. It's not terribly bad, but you may notice it, so I wanted to give you a heads up. Anyway, enjoy the episode, and for more information, check out pcgamer.com.
Hello and welcome to the PC Gamer podcast. I'm Graham Smith. I'm going to be your host today, just for the hell of it. And I'm joined in the podcast studio by Marsh Davies.
Hello.
Who is leaving us because he's a terrible human being and he hates us and he hates PC games and he hates you if you're listening to this.
All these things are entirely true, actually, as it turns out. I thought you were going to say start off with some kind of eccentric rumour, but you've really hit the nail on the head there.
We're very sad that he's leaving. And Chris Thurston.
Hi.
Who is bitter at me because he's not hosting this particular podcast.
I'm not going to rise to this, Graham.
You so are. Gentlemen, what's your spirit animal?
We've done this
We've done this one before.
Have you?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I don't remember
although I changed
anymore.
my mind about what it was.
Oh, really?
After the podcast, I realised my spirit animal isn't so much an animal, but an animal from fiction. I'm very much Molly, I've decided, from Wind in the Willows, with a dash of badger.
Yeah, I would say there's a dash of badger in there.
Yeah, quite a lot of badger.
Who did we decide is Toad?
From Wind in the Willows?
I don't remember this anymore, and now it's just gone
Perhaps
weird.
Dan Grilliopoulos.
Yeah. He is definitely PC Gamer freelancer.
Yeah.
Dan Grilliopoulos.
Toot toot. He's always driving around in that car.
It's, and in many ways, you know, British PC game journalism is a lot like The Wind in the Willows, and then occasionally it goes all animals of farthing wood.
I used to love that as a kid. I used to buy the magazine,
Really?
collect the stickers.
Magazines.
See, I feel like I've failed in my duties now as host. Right from the start, I started off bad. What would your question have been, Chris?
Well, my question was...
Put me to shame.
I was going to start with a question so much as maybe interrogate Martin a little bit more about the whys and wherefores of his departure. You know, his ambitions, his hopes, his fears, his dreams, his broad hatred, which is kind of like a beam of energy that he radiates outward.
Yeah.
Like Molly from Wind in the Willows. But I think, you know, I don't think we should dwell too much on, you know, the failings of this introduction. My spirit animal was, I think we established last year, one of those little sugar glider things that climbs very tall trees and, you know, like a little marsupial with sort of weird vestigial wings. A part of evolution you don't quite understand, but nonetheless is there.
Fair enough.
What would yours be, Graham?
I'm going to go with panda. I feel like I'm should probably just be allowed to die, but kept alive by society because I'm so cute.
This is true.
I was going to argue for a sort of strange flightless bird.
Chicken
like an emu
or stranger?
Or, you know, like, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen you get, like, ostrich angry.
No.
But there is, you know, maybe it's just because you're tall. I don't know.
It's more like a bird that's never discovered it has natural predators before. So it's kind of...
Yeah.
It's kind of, you know...
Like something that lives on like a
peaceable
Pacific atoll where it hasn't been preyed on by... But would probably be easily
Stares
destroyed
up,
if someone
but it's-
introduced
yeah.
rats.
Looks at
It
its
sounds quite nice.
imminent demise with a look of benevolence and calm, not
Yeah.
realising the terror that's to come.
I think this is also because you're capable of making squawking noises when excited or cross.
But only when excited and cross, and I am neither right now.
Yeah.
What have you been playing recently, Martin?
I have been playing... Can I talk about two games? I'll talk about them quite quickly because
No.
one of them is...
Pick one.
If
Fuck you.
I was leading this, Martin, I would like to speak about both games slowly.
Well, I think I prefer Chris as a leader here.
Okay, you can speak about both, but then you have to speak about a third game as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Can I just not... Okay, well, you've asked me first. I'm going to steal your game as the third game then.
Fine.
This has become a really passive-aggressive podcast.
Yeah.
I want to talk about...
PC Gamer's resentment comes out.
Lots of indie games this week. So I want to talk about Papers, Please. And I want to talk about Starseed Pilgrim. I'll talk about Starseed Pilgrim first, which is a game recently released on Steam, and it's sort of a mixture of roguelike and Tetris and platformer, but in a kind of configuration where you would recognise none of those things in it immediately. So it looks most like a platformer. You're this little dude standing on this block in the middle of this big, wide, open, empty space. And you can place seeds on the block, which then grow other blocks in certain kinds of configurations, depending on the seed. But the seeds that you get are randomized, and you can do different things to collect seeds. And a lot has been made about how those mechanics progress and how you don't know what your goal is and process of discovering what your goal is and then how you can manipulate those mechanics and discover new mechanics to achieve it is what has been widely touted as its kind of appeal. So I can't really say a great deal more than that. I don't entirely agree with that, though. I think there are things in it which are frustrating, and I would have been happy to recognise as problems before I encountered them. But
I've seen an awful lot of people write and talk about this game without really articulating what it's about or why it's good. And is that because they're all just they think that discovery is the part of the joy? And because so far people telling me that has not made me go and seek out this game to play it.
Yeah, it is. Discovery is partly the joy, although I suspect that most people haven't finished it because it gets really fucking hard. So it's kind of difficult to tell what the point is. And I haven't finished it because it gets really fucking hard. And so to explain a bit more without kind of spoiling the thing that you're doing, you as you're building these blocks, which kind of spool off like vines essentially from this central block, and you have to travel along. There's a kind of corruption which is chasing you from the block you're on originally, and that spreads through all the blocks quite quickly, and it spreads through the different blocks that you can plant essentially at different speeds. So there's a kind of strategy in working out how to slow down the thing chasing you and to hasten your progress, and eventually you realize where you're fleeing to. And that also changes your strategy in the way that you place the blocks, because then you need to reutilize the kind of environment that you've created for yourself, but in a completely different way than you were using it before.
Okay.
Which is interesting. But after you kind of get over that hump, after you get over that realization, and there are other goals that you realize that you can then achieve, everything is. I mean, you know how like in Spelunky, also a roguelike game, a roguelike platformer. After you've kind of got through the first few levels, you get the opportunity to create shortcuts to the kind of advanced stages. None of that fucking kid glove stuff here. Like, it's just fucking hard, and most of the things are just outside of your ability to control. So there is skill involved and there's strategy involved, but at the end of the day, most of the stuff that affects your success or failure is completely randomized. And it just means that you have to essentially do the same thing over and over and over again until you luck out. And that's at the really high level. I mean, the good thing is that it feels nice to play. It's got this, every time you place a block, it grows and it creates sound, and it's kind of a really lush aesthetic kind of thing, despite looking very minimalist. But so it's kind of pleasurable just to do. But I don't really know if I have the patience to find out where it's going now at the high level.
Is it fun to fail at all?
No-ish. Yeah.
No.
Well, failure isn't really failure. Failure puts you somewhere else where you do something else. So
Okay. Wow, this is hard to describe.
Okay.
So your objectives change upon failure, essentially. And that can be good.
So the game doesn't stop, you keep playing, and so failure is not go back to the start, or does it become...
Yeah, but it is like go back to the start, but it's also like Spelunky in as much as there are things that you've achieved which persist through different failures.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool. But I don't know.
The reason I bring it up is because the key to like a roguelike like Spelunky or FTL even is that the fail state is actually quite exciting or funny or slapstick in some way, and you kind of bounce back from it and think, I'll play this again now.
Yeah, there's not really any slapstick in this game. And no, but I mean that's a valid way of kind of alleviating the feeling of failure. And I don't think there is that in this. In fact, there's quite a few occasions where I was just like, oh, that makes me fail. Oh, great. Oh, okay. I've just kind of spent 10 minutes doing that now, and I have to do it again. And maybe that after a certain period of time isn't so great.
Keeping in mind that you might not go back to it because it's become so hard, so you might not see where it's going. Do you regret the time you've spent with it? And with that, would you recommend that people go check it out for themselves to see if it's...
Yeah, I would recommend it despite that, because I don't know how much it costs on Steam, but I can't imagine it's a whole wad of cash, and it is enjoyable, and maybe you'll just be better at it than I am, which is quite possible. But I said I was going to keep this short, but I want to talk about something else now, can I?
Do what you like.
Do what you like.
Thanks, Dad.
Yes.
That's all right. Ignore your mother.
So I tend to think that when you look at books or films, I can pretty much, I'm not saying I'm a brilliant genius or anything, but when I look at the first page of a book...
I love any argument that starts that way.
Well, no.
I'm not saying that I'm great or anything, but
this is a skill that
Batman.
every man should have, right? I think everybody does. You look at the first page of the book and you can pretty much tell whether that's going to be a good book or not. You can tell whether you're going to like it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a margin of error there. Maybe some books are difficult to get into, but on the whole, you can tell whether that book is spelt like shit or the person doesn't know how to form sentences. You can kind of get an idea about the genre it's in, maybe.
Tony Ellis, our production editor, says you should always do the page 100 test. So you look at the first page and then skip forward and look at the 100th page and judge it based on that.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, books and films, and even music, I can pretty much tell whether it's going to be worth my time investment almost instantaneously. I never get that at all from games. And so when you get games which are about the process of exploration and they're about discovering mechanics, you really have to kind of say, okay, I'm really going to have to give you the benefit of the doubt now because I don't know where you're going. It could end up being a pile of shit. And maybe you won't discover that for 10 fucking hours. And I really think it's very risky. And a lot of indie games make this mistake of just assuming that their audience are going to be just engaged with them for the entire journey and just, bumble along through their majestic journey of discovery. And actually, you might do that and discover that the indie developer is not actually that bright. And it doesn't really have anything interesting to say.
There are a lot of indie game trailers which don't give any sense of what the game is or is about or what you do in it, which is not great. They predicate themselves upon
ambiguity, and
mystery. That the mystery is going to be so compelling. But it's
unique to indie games in the slightest. I mean, not even from a marketing point of view, but the point about not being able to tell what the game's about from the first minute you spend with it is absolutely true of any game with a tutorial, for example, or any action game that opens with a QuickTime event, or there's so many different ways for games to help. I mean, I was trying to think just while you were talking about it, like RPGs by their nature, by the fact that you expand your capabilities and the complexity of your character in a progression system over time means that minute one you're not going to get a sense for what it's like. The only game I can think of that's an exception to that is Dragon Age 2, as broadly, as lamented as it is on the internet, I think wrongly. The opening of Dragon Age 2 is a false opening where you see your character at max level with all of your abilities, and it's no challenge in that moment. You're just wiping out hordes of guys, and you can mash the buttons, and you do a million spectacular things. And then, because it's an unreliable narrator thing, someone calls bullshit on that, and then you start the actual game at level 1, but you've already seen. It's giving you a little sort of sense of, this is where you want to play this, so you can become this wizard. You know what I mean? Like, that's a clever way of solving the problem you raised. But I don't think enough games do anything to solve that problem.
Do we think this problem is maybe perhaps why games are a bit more conservative with world design and stuff than perhaps other mediums would be? Like, if you don't know what you're going to get from a game, it certainly helps if your RPG looks like a Tolkien fantasy world, because people get, this one's about elves and stuff. Probably I will get a better bit of armor in a little while. Those kinds of things become shorthand for.
That's a good point. Maybe that's why genre is so much more important, or has been important in games than it has maybe in other media.
But then again, like, think how hard both Bioshock games. I mean, both Bioshock 1 and Bioshock Infinite have incredibly strong openings that are all about how different their settings are going to be. After a very brief lighthouse introduction, you are then either catapulted into something, and then those sort of opening moments when you first see Rapture, you first see Columbia, are so meticulously designed to be impressive and spectacular and to make you want to explore them that they really, it's one of the best things about those games. I think that would be a successful example of a game making you want to keep playing within the first 5 minutes.
But people had big problems with the Bioshock Infinite box art because it had a man holding a gun with an explosion in front of him.
I don't know what was
There's
wrong
a
with
lot
that
of people in
box
that
art.
game.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's like this is a game about a world which isn't a recognizable fantasy world from other things necessarily. It's not just elves or anything like that. But they still use certain iconography to let you know this is about shooting people. Don't worry.
Yeah. I mean, but
you know what you're getting up to a certain point.
Yeah, I suppose you could point to the fact how much the the last Shadowrun game struggled. I was trying to think of a game where it
the multiplayer.
Yeah, the multiplayer only one really struggled, and I think part of that was Shadowrun is a cool setting, but people go, oh, elves. Wait a minute, guns, and then having crossed the wires, people short out and don't buy it.
It was a pretty bad realization of that setting as well. It looks a bit.
Yeah, it was an alright game actually. I thought, but it was just it was not the way to when a setting's that unusual to sell it through multiplayer only team shooter is not maybe the thing.
Can I tell you about Papers, Please?
Yes.
Really quickly.
No, go for it.
It will be really quick. It's on Steam Greenlight right now, and you should definitely vote for it. And if you're uncertain about voting for it after my enthusiastic endorsement of it, you should go and check out the free beta of it, which is a pretty complete-looking beta. But it's you play as a officious border control guard on the border of a fictional Eastern European communist state circa 1983. And your job is essentially to process all the people who want to get into your country, be they civilians of your own country, citizens of your own country, or immigrants. And it's a game about you just get all this kind of bump shoved through the kind of grill on your border control office door, and you have to sort it out. And you have to check for inconsistencies and cross-check it with a rule book and all this stuff. And it's this kind of, but it's under kind of time pressure as well. And it becomes this really exciting kind of fun. And it's very funny as well. Fun game of kind of detective work essentially because it's really great and it looks cool. It's got a really cool pixel art style and it's bleak and really blackly funny, and you should check it out. And
Sounds awesome.
That's all I have to say about that.
Sounds like you're not concerned there's some kind of like war games type scenario here where you're actually checking it because there's if it's that kind of detailed.
Yeah, I've probably incarcerated a lot of people now. Sent them away to be dropped in some Siberian mineshaft. I don't know, broken their families. It's really good. It's very funny. What have you been playing, somebody?
Graham, I thought we'd move on to next, who has been...
Are you taking over the hosting duties, are you, Chris? Aha, I think you'll find you're next.
That's not... You can't
You're
just
gonna have a
deflect
next
over
off.
there. Oh, man. Okay, fine. I'm going to talk about Dota.
Oh, dear.
See, this is what happens. This people listening is what I have to deal with every time I want to talk about basically the only game I play.
Can't we talk about FIFA instead?
No, Graham, we can't because I'm going next. You can talk about FIFA in a minute. But yeah, like every what I've been playing, I've done on this podcast since like June last year has been a game of don't talk about Dota, talk about anything else I've been playing. But there's some specific things that have kind of happened recently that have sort of made me think about Dota slightly differently again. So over the weekend, I passed 500 hours of Dota, according to the Steam clock, which is admittedly a little bit unreliable. Martin, what are you doing?
Nothing. Carry on. I've just got a waffle. Are they called waffles or waffles? I can't remember. I don't do.
Microphone cover for the
Microphone
folks
cover.
listening at home.
Yeah, the photos come. Martin is now making semi-lewd gestures.
It found its way to my hand. That's all. Not everything that finds its way to my hand is lewd, though many things are. Anyway, sorry, you were
I'm
saying.
glad you're leaving. I'm not. I'm sorry. That didn't mean that.
Tell me about Dota.
Okay, fine. So I across the 500 hours mark, which makes Dota probably my most played game of all time. Maybe, maybe Star Wars Galaxy is slightly more, but he made a tiny bowler hat. That's amazing. Anyway, but also, you wouldn't believe how amazingly distracting that is.
Sorry. Okay, I'll put it away.
Thank you.
I'll
Give it to me.
Again, this is
Mum.
what I have to put up with. So yeah, and also last night I crossed 200 wins as well, which is kind of. And I'm thinking about it because specifically, as I've gotten better at it, and as I've played more of it, and the people I started playing with, and kind of, and spent more time watching replays, and watching the competitive scene, and watching videos, and reading guides, and writing my own guide. Actually, at one point for Hero and stuff like that, I noticed, like, I felt like I was on the cusp of Graham, not you as well.
Stop being distracted by our distractions.
You felt you were on the cusp
of becoming an asshole.
Oh.
Right? Like, Dota, famously aggressive community, famously punishing community. One of the things, you can commend people in the game if they're friendly or whatever, give them a little nod. And one of the categories is forgiving, because it's one of the biggest weaknesses of people who play Dota is that they are unforgiving when people make mistakes or when things don't go to plan. Getting shouted at is, kind of normal. I played a game at lunchtime an hour ago now where a guy completely lost his shit over voice chat at a bunch of strangers. And there are people that, I just don't like playing with because of their sort of attitude. And I realized that I was kind of really worried as I became more in a teaching role, more in a role of actually telling people what they were doing wrong or kind of having to kind of steer the team a bit most of the time. I realized that I was on the cusp of getting short with people. Sometimes I have been short with people. And I really don't want to be that guy. And I started to worry, genuinely, is it possible that this game that I love and that I play, every day could be bad for me? And then that's, it sounds like a trivial thing to worry about, but genuinely, seriously, kind of concerning, right? I don't want to be that guy. And then I realized, and it was kind of a revelation, that it's actually my choice to learn whether to be good at teaching people or not. And I made a sort of rule for myself that I was going to be much more positive, even when playing on my own with strangers, that I was always going to try and offer constructive advice. I wasn't going to hold people to task for mistakes they'd made, but might ask people or suggest things to do that might make things easier in the future to avoid similar situations. And that's going to be much, much more constructive. And it's worked really, really well. You suddenly find, I've had a run of games where everyone on my team has been really nice, just strangers. And you get far more out of people. And in a way, what started off as being this really worrying kind of, am I going to have to quit this before I become a prick thing, has become this kind of really maybe actually there is it's not just about learning these kind of really arcane rules and systems and characters and stuff. There's actually something genuine I can take away from this, which I now genuinely feel like I'm better at giving people advice than I was, thanks to Dota.
That's crazy. I don't think I've ever been given any kind of useful life skill from games. Or social skill, certainly not.
Seriously, this is the power games have, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because, I think the way to illustrate it would be the way that criticism manifests most of the time in a Dota match, even from otherwise friendly, eloquent players, is, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Why didn't you help me? Why didn't you stun that guy? Why didn't you interrupt that spell? Why didn't you use that item? Why haven't you bought that? Why didn't you go there? Why didn't you have a town portal scroll on you? All of these things. And I realized how fundamentally, rhetorically stupid that statement is.
Right, yeah.
It's
not going to help anybody, is it?
Graham and I, we were talking briefly about this last night after work, but there's an XKCD comic that you brought up, which is completely true, which is, the moment before you learn something, you can't be expected to know that thing, right? Everyone only encounters new information for the first time once.
Yeah. It's that everything there was a point in your life before you knew that thing. And the fact that some people find out that piece of information later in life doesn't actually change anything.
Yeah. It
seems like it's a failure of human empathy that we sometimes forget that. We can't fathom why another person might have had experiences different from our experiences and therefore have a different set of information.
It's a stupid, it's an infantile sort of it's that 2-year-old thing where they don't believe that the rest of the world exists. And it manifests in Dota in the players who genuinely don't understand that the other players on their team are players so much as, little people to be steered around and to support them. And it manifests over on certain types of character roles. So the hard carries, the people you need to support so that they can become really powerful in the late game, tend to manifest, and that's why they're famously snippy, is because they tend to be the people who suffer most if they're unsupported, and therefore are more likely to kind of close off, why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you do this? But it's completely, even if you feel that way, and I have said those words, and I do know what it feels like to just not know why someone didn't do something. Just the other night I made fun of Rich for not knowing something that I've probably known for about 480 hours now. But really, you do only learn information for the first time once, and just learning to be more empathetic and to try and actually sort of, if people are going to fail anyway, make that an enjoyable experience for people, then actually the game itself becomes more rewarding in a way beyond how rewarding it already is, which has been kind of interesting.
How many more hundreds of hours do you think it'll take before you're not a bell end?
Thanks, Martin.
Oh, I'm kidding.
Well, probably. Let's say it's taken me 500 hours to go from pretty much a total prick to trying to not be a prick. So like that puts me in like the third act of this.
Do you think this was like the MOBA plan all along, was just to de-prickify like huge swathes of the gaming populace?
The thing is, I don't think it will do that. Like I think it has prickified a vast amount.
But maybe
people.
that's just an early spike on the graph to non-prickness.
I think. Well, I mean, that relies on everyone having the same revelation, and I think some aspects of the community incentivize a certain assholeness, and I think you see that most sort of pointedly in maybe in other games, especially where they've kind of where systems have actually encouraged people to trash talk or whatever. Heroes and you have suffered for that.
Oh yeah.
You're a David Foster Wallace fan, aren't you, Chris?
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, have you read the text of his commencement address? It gets passed around a lot. I can't remember what university.
There's an
audio recording as well. And he talks in that about... it's about freedom and the things in life that will enslave you, and it's about empathy. And he talks about this subject from the perspective of, say, being in a supermarket and you've had a long day at work and you're tired and you're just trying to get your food and get home, and you're carrying your heavy bags and you're walking down the aisle, and there's two people at the end of the aisle stood there talking, and they're in your way, and you get annoyed with them for being thoughtless. Like, why the hell are you just standing in the aisle, blocking the aisle? And I do this. I get really annoyed at people who stand with their shopping trolley next to another person with their shopping trolley, blocking the entire path. And it's this thing of other people become not human beings. They become obstacles. They're just things in your way. And I think that happens in games, especially in a game like Dota, when you're so reliant on other people, where your teammates aren't actually people anymore. They're just obstacles in your way on your route towards winning. And this ties in nicely with a GDC talk I went to see from Riot Games, the guys that make League of Legends. And they have a similar problem with their community, and they did a talk about some of the psychological experiments that they've been doing with their audience to try and encourage a better community and more positive play from their players. And part of this is the player tribunal, which they've, it's obviously people know about already. Rather than having just Riot handing down judgments on people, there's actually peer review now, where if you are deemed by the community and by your peers to have done things wrong in a number of matches, then it's your peers that set your punishment, and you get feedback about why you've been banned or suspended from the game for a certain period of time and stuff like that. And that's had a measurably positive effect in people understanding what they've done wrong and then improving that behaviour. But now what they're doing is things like priming.
And I've seen,
priming.
Priming is a concept in psychology, and it's backed up by a bunch of studies. And to give an example, if you see the color red before you do a performance measuring test, you will do worse on the test than if you had not seen the color red beforehand. If you have to do an activity that involves the word elderly, you will be slower to leave the room after you've completed the task than if that word wasn't there. And there's a bunch of this stuff. Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And they've been doing this with League of Legends, so that on the loading screen, as in most games, normally you get a game tip or hint to help you. And what they've started doing is replacing that hint with some statistic. Like, for example, teams that work together win 14% more of their games, or players who get 40% of players who get banned don't go on to reoffend, that kind of thing. And they show these different messages, and they show them in red, blue, white, or not at all. And not at all being the control group in this experiment. And then they run these messages over hundreds of thousands of games, because 32 million people at least play League of Legends, and so they're getting a lot of data from this. The data they've got isn't based on a small sample size by any measure. And they came and said, if we show this message in red, then player behaviour is 14% more positive. And if we show it in blue, then it's 8% more negative. In terms of...
What's the kind of margin for error on those kind of tests?
I don't know what the margin of error would be.
Yeah.
But it's
The 14% seems pretty significant, though.
yeah, and some of them were like 30%. You know, we show this message, things get, there's 30% fewer incidents of negative behavior get reported and stuff like that. And then in some cases, that's like, you can say it's the wording. So like one of the messages they showed was a question. It was, who will be the most sportsmanlike player on this team? And that caused reports of negative behaviour to increase by like 40%, because it has a spotlight effect. Either everyone on the team is far more aware of their teammates' negative behaviour and so is more likely to report it, or everyone on the team is competing to be the most sportsmanlike and so is voting against their teammates to report them and stuff like that. But in other instances, it's hard to see how it's misleading data, and they've got such a large sample size that it seems like this stuff works. And it was given by a guy at Riot, this talk, called Jeremy Lin, and he was talking basically about the psychology of it, but more broadly the responsibility that games developers have to shield their community from the worst aspects of that community, but also the amazing opportunity games developers have to help people become better people. And they showed a bunch of feedback, and obviously these quotes are taken out of context and you can cherry pick, and it's a large enough community, but they had lots of evidence and people on the forum saying, I did not understand why this foul language was wrong, the N-word and so on. Now I do. Thank you for teaching me about this. And that's just fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because like in Dota's case, there's nothing really in the. I mean, its report system allows you to sort of submit a report about a player who's been acting badly. One of those categories is sort of verbal or text abuse, but the other two are sort of intentional feeding the other team or whatever. And then if sometimes you'll log on and you'll have a little pop up that'll say, a previous report has been acted on. You won't get any which one, but it's much more kind of opaque than LOL system, probably to a fault. And its commendation system allows you to vote people up for friendly or forgiving or good leadership or whatever. And one thing I thought was really interesting about that is how universally misunderstood those systems are. Occasionally you get people who use them right, occasionally. But most people think that commendations are for good players, skilled players, even though it's a social thing, even though this guy's friendly. And the reports are for bad players. So that you issue a behavior report against someone who is bad. And so it's really easy, it's really common to see at the end of a game, a bunch of players on the winning team asking the other team for commendations, even though they, we very rarely speak in global chat in Dota because it's such a team game. They wouldn't have heard the things that are going on. And people on the team who've lost, and they've chosen which member of the team they're going to put the loss on, saying, report this guy, he's awful, report this guy, he's shit. And so the system has almost entirely failed, I think. Or at least I would be interested in seeing if it is succeeding, then it's succeeding really invisibly, for everyone else. But the point about priming people is completely true, and it's achievable in Dota, which is kind of interesting. And like one thing I was talking to you last night is the way that the bonus system works. Like there are very few things in Dota that you pay for that have anything to do with your performance in the game at all. The only thing is point boosters that mean that you get 75% more battle points at the end of a game. But points are only given towards a level which is entirely cosmetic, and leveling up only gets you items that are entirely cosmetic. So there's no, there are zero balance issues with any of the microtransaction stuff, which is its great strength. But those boosters, which are kind of common to most free-to-play games, when you buy them, if you have one activated, everyone else in the game you're playing gets a 15% boost simply because you've got a boost on. And this is announced at the start of the game, saying that you have boosted everyone's point rate by 15%. And there's like a particle effect bloom that happens over everyone's head. And I maintain those boosts, not because I give a shit about my level or the amount of battle points, but because that is an instant goodwill boost that's targeted on me. And very specifically, like the game at the beginning of a Dota match now is, how can I get all of the, because I solo queue a lot, which means I'm playing by myself with random strangers. How can I get as many of these people on side as fast as possible? Like, into Camp Thurston, like, Team Thurston hashtag, because that will be necessary later in the game. Like, I might not have chosen what role, I might accept a role I don't want, or swap heroes with someone who doesn't want to play the hero they got in a random situation. in order to establish that, I'll be the guy who upgrades the courier early and spends gold doing that, or, goes to stack camps for someone, or any of these other mechanics you can do, basically because it becomes about mind games at that point. That's what's really interesting. That's what's transferable about it. Maybe, the kind of positive, becoming a better, more caring, better leader, teacher is one side of that. Becoming more manipulative actually goes hand in hand with that in a really interesting way.
I really like the idea of, was it Riot who was giving this talk?
Yeah.
I really like the idea that games have gone from being this corrupting influence, much kind of maligned by hapless parents, to being better parents than the parents themselves.
Yeah.
That's a really cool
as soon as you concede that games could be a bad influence, you kind of have to concede they could also be a good influence, right? If they have that power at all, it goes both ways. If they have the power to change behavior, then you can use it.
One of the other things that we're saying, and this kind of draws a line through the David Foster Wallace thing and all of this, is that the people you see losing their shit in these games, who are just tearing into another player, aren't necessarily a habitual troll who does that all the time in different games. What they find is that most of the people who get reported against, and they can look at chat logs, who just lose their shit and go nuts, that might be the only time they've ever done that, or that might be the only time they'll do it for the next 3 months. And it's people having a bad day. And that's, they've had a bad day at work or whatever, they're coming home and they lose their temper, they completely lose their shit, and they probably won't do it again afterwards. But the flip of that is also that one person having a bad day and tearing into someone then triggers other people's bad days, and the behavior spreads. And so sometimes you'll get one person will just lose their shit, and that will cause another person in the game who also hasn't done it in 6 months to lose their shit, and then it just becomes chaos and the whole thing. And then you've just got a big group of people who are now unhappy, and it's not they're not bad people, they're just having a bad day. And when you start thinking of it like that, it changes the way you think about the assholes you see on the internet.
Yeah.
Because they're not necessarily assholes. Maybe,
well,
not necessarily. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes
we're all
not.
2-year-olds. Basically, we just get bigger and grow beards. But that is why this sort of conscious effort I made to do this. Like, that's why it was sort of satisfying feedback from it, right? Like, because I could have made this effort to be better at, be just a better human being and not rise to this stuff. But because that stuff does spread, like the fact that I'm not rising to it makes my games more pleasant to be in, and therefore makes me less likely. Like, the feedback cycle goes both ways again. Like, if I sort of catch myself before I go, oh, for fuck's sake. Like, because it's very rarely, like, outward ranting. Just, before you say something negative or express something negative, to catch yourself and make a joke about it, you then sort of diffuse situations, which prevents you from feeling quite so angry. It's kind of amazing. You should give it a try.
Not sure.
Not convinced.
Yeah, no. I really like just going to blind range and smashing shit up. That's how I deal with this kind of stuff. Yeah. What have you been playing, Graham?
I've been playing Monaco. Speaking of
that, that's really good, according to
everybody, including PC Gamer. Everyone seems to love this game. But I think it's maybe an example of what you were talking about before, of games that you don't necessarily know right away whether you're going to like it or what you're going to get from that experience. Because I was playing it last night. I've only played it for an hour so far, but I played it with you and with Tom and with former PC Gamer freelancer Kim Richards. And it was just baffling. I had no idea what was happening for most of that experience. So to explain to anyone who doesn't know it, Monaco is a 4-player co-op 2D top-down heist-em-up. You're given a mission to go steal an object in a building, like, for example, a trophy from a bank or a mansion or something, and then you pick your character class, like a pickpocket or a lookout, and they're all kind of based on heist movie archetypes, like Ocean's 11 or something like that. And then you break into the place, sneak past the guards, or kill the guards if you want, steal the thing, and then get back out again, working with your friends to do it. But it's all presented in this kind of, well, I think you described it best.
What did I say? I have no idea.
It's kind of it's a blueprint by way of Jeff Minter.
Oh, right.
I can't remember exactly what your phrasing,
really
what your rephrasing of it was. It's pixel art, and it's got two things going on. It's got fog of war and it's got line of sight. So there's areas of the map which are black, and there are areas of the map which are a grey blueprint, and then the areas that you can see are, phosphorescent almost, they glow, and that makes it really hard to see what's going on because you're running about this world which is constantly changing, constantly turning invisible, and everything is small icons, and sometimes those icons end up overlaid. And then when you're playing at co-op, you've got 4 characters running around, and then if one of those characters is hacking a computer terminal, that means that you can now see part of the power grid, and then you've got those kind of power nodes bouncing around, and lasers and guards and guns. And now you're in a bush and you didn't realize that was a bush, you thought it was a door, and now you're trying to go through this door, but it turns out it's a window. And and I think I wasn't alone in that experience.
No, I thought it was really visually one of the most kind of aggressively confusing games I've seen in a long time. Like up there with psychedelic shmup games of the kind that Jeff Minter, also trying to struggle to remember any of his games now. Tempest, yeah.
I mean, that was a long time ago.
Space Giraffe and things like that. But it's not, obviously it's essentially a bit like Pac-Man in a lot of ways. And yet what is so weird about it is it's got this contradictory art style where it's going for like all the levels before you can see them, they're laid out as these kind of grey blueprints, right? Like a schematic of a building. And you'd think that would be the most concise and easy way to show people the layout of something. And yet it's overlaid with this kind of shimmering, iridescent kind of lines of sight flashing up through windows and stuff, and all this kind of particle effects and other stuff going over the top that makes it completely impossible to discern anything in any kind of easy way. And all the character classes are different, aren't they? And they have... slightly different abilities that don't necessarily seem to be useful, but
I think it's trapped. I mean, again, we've only played it for an hour, and people seem to fall in love with it once they play it for longer, so it might be the same for us, but it feels like the character classes are trapped between this place of being designed for co-op and being designed for single player. And if you're playing them in co-op, then the fact that you're the pickpocket, say, so you get a bit more loot, doesn't actually seem to make that much of a difference, because the rest of your teammates have the other relevant skills that you might need in any given situation. It's also not clear what those classes sometimes do. Like we were the lookout, and I was the lookout 3 times and didn't work out what that actually did, and then Kim was the lookout, and then Tom was the lookout twice, and then on the second time he was the lookout, we worked out, when he crouches, everyone can see where the guards are on the map. But the maps are so dense that you just we didn't notice that anything was changing or what was changing it.
Well, not only that, but I mean, with the lookout, so every other player who isn't the lookout gets to see more of the map from the lookout's perspective when the lookout is sneaking. But the lookout, this is not flagged to him that other people's vision has been enhanced at all. That's there's no way of him knowing what other people can see or which parts of what he can see has been shown to them. And from the other people's perspective, it's suddenly all these kind of blooms of vision suddenly appearing and then disappearing maybe when he stops sneaking. Is just very distracting and confusing and not necessarily help. I think all of those systems could come together to be like if expert people played them, they could use them in a really really brilliant way. I don't see that I could ever become expert. Not without a huge amount of effort, and getting to that point is just going to be a real struggle, I think, just with 4 people. But maybe you need to play it by yourself for a long period of time.
I wonder if that's the case, and I wonder if the classes are better that way. Like, I was the the locksmith, who can pick locks on doors slightly faster than everyone else, but everyone else can do it as well. So if someone else gets to a door a second before you, your thing is useless. They've already picked it by the time you get there, or you both pick it at the same time. It doesn't make that much difference. But if you're playing it single player and you select the locksmith, then that becomes an interesting choice, because you're foregoing the abilities of the mole and the gentleman and the lookout and all the others. You're making a sacrifice there. You're saying the most important thing is that I'm going to get through doors quicker and get away from guards quicker. That's an interesting decision to make because of the sacrifice you're making, and because you're on your own, it will be more useful because you're the only one who's ever going to be picking locks. Whereas when it was the 4 of us, it just didn't didn't seem to make that much difference that one guy was slightly faster at it. It wasn't like the other guys were getting to the door and saying, no, don't do it, let the locksmith. It was like, no, they're all just running into the door.
Yeah. I think there's probably also basically we played it wrong. I think there's also a tension between the way it looks like it might be a story-driven or a campaign-driven game, because there's a succession of levels that are linked, and there's a kind of loose narrative over them. So you kind of assume that the way to play it would be to start with one level and then just plough through them in sequence. Whereas actually, I think it would probably be more rewarding to us if we had just picked one level and done it over and over and over again until we got it right, or to our satisfaction. Whereas we just did lots of levels badly, and of course, you're never going to do the levels well the first time, I suspect.
Yeah.
Particularly not if you don't know the game.
Yeah, we didn't understand it mechanically or visually.
Yeah.
We didn't know what we were doing or why we were doing it or how we were doing it.
90 out of 100.
I mean, the review that Cassandra Carr wrote for us.
She's played it a lot more than we have.
She plays it a lot more than we have, and she makes it sound great as well. She argues her case really well. And we're probably just talking a bunch of bullshit because we don't know any better. But it's still an interesting thing of just games in their first hour not explaining themselves particularly well. Is that okay, or is that a bad thing? I tend to think it's a bad thing.
Answers on a postcard. Or via email, which would probably be more convenient.
Or via questions from Twitter.
Nice segue.
Segue. Usually that would be you. I should have let you do it actually for your final.
Or from questions from Twitter.
Fine, I can bleep out my one and it'll just.
That'll be fine. It'll be perfectly smooth.
Right. Yeah.
Let's do them.
Graham, you talking?
I've just realised something terrible in that I forgot to turn my phone into airplane mode. So if there's been really annoying beeping and chuntering throughout this entire podcast, blame Chris. He's the host.
Graham, I gave you the matrix of leadership, and this is how you have squandered it.
Well, then pass me the goblet of Twitter questions, and I shall drink deep from it.
No, because your open scorn of Twitter questions and the people who ask them makes me. I don't trust you with them.
It makes much more sense that I be asking the questions than answering them, since I have nothing but hatred in my heart.
Mummy and Daddy, why do you fight?
Because you're leaving.
The paper is gone.
I will pick a different shtick this week, and I will respond not with hatred, but with empathy and pleasantness. See, as we have learned is better.
Yeah, exactly. You should know, Graham. Shh. By the way, just before we start, the last two questions are kind of similar, so I put a little plus so that you can read them both out. We can answer them as one.
That's good.
Okay.
Yes,
I didn't want you to fuck that up. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Should we do this? Okay.
I'm Chris's boss, everyone. Remember. I'm a benevolent boss. Vincent Redfenig asks, in the situation of Guild Wars 2's success, which payment model do you guys think Elder Scrolls Online will have?
I would hope that they go with the Guild Wars 2 payment model, actually. I think it's probably the best fit for the game they're making.
Just to be clear, Guild Wars 2 payment model is just you buy the game, and then there's a little bit of microtransactions, but not very much.
Paid for game with no subscription, and you pay for things like extra character slots, certain kinds of resource boosts, but nothing really that can kind of seriously change your competitive game. Might speed you up in monster killing, but not in PvP, for example.
Do you think, given Elder Scrolls Online's huge pitched battles that it wants to pull off in its PvP stuff, that it would be better off being free to play though, because then it would attract larger audiences of people?
I mean, Guild Wars 2 is the same system. Bear in mind, I think they're pretty much split with Camelot Unchained, the Dark Age of Camelot development team who were responsible for that system in the first game it showed up in. Guild Wars 2's got the same claim to it that Elder Scrolls does, and it works for Guild Wars. So, I think with that license, they can rely on the license is the interesting thing, but they can rely on a certain amount of sales, basically, especially at a non-subscription price point. That will mean you'll have your population for,
Yeah.
And also, I think it's far easier for a sort of a boxed game. Whatever it's called, the buy to play model, but I kind of hate that phrase because it's dumb.
Buy to play. I like getting my sandwiches on the buy to eat model.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I live in my house on the buy to live there model, as opposed to the monthly.
Technically, you're on a subscription.
Oh yeah,
model.
shit, I am. It's a bad analogy. Okay, anyway, yeah, but like I think it's probably far easier and less traumatic for a game with a one-off payment supported by a microtransaction store to transition to a free-to-play model later on, or for example, to lower the price to a tenner, right, and or whatever, to lower the barrier to entry, than it is for a subscription game to do that, because this is the promise of the subscription is give us your money every month and we will mean you don't have to ever think about paying, right? You'll, as counterintuitive as that sounds, you sort of you set up your direct debit and your recurring payment, and then you don't really think about money when you're playing the game. Whereas when there's a store present, you're constantly aware that you could be spending, and that's why these transitions to free to play to previously subscription games is so traumatic to people, because people who previously kind of used to not seeing that stuff now feel like they're being nickel and dimed, however much free shit they get, in inverted commas free stuff they get. And then you get games like The Secret World that fucked it up entirely because it was a subscription game with a paid box and a microtransaction store, which is the triple whammy of this isn't going to work, basically. I think the best model for Elder Scrolls, based on its structure, because it is kind of like Guild Wars in structure, would be the buy to play. They could justify a subscription on the grounds that there's a vast amount of content by all accounts, because of their quite clever system where when you reach the level cap, it's 3 factions, and like in WoW or something, you level through the content for your faction. Your path from 1 to 50 or whatever is on the people you've chosen to join. When you get to level 50, and I'll explain exactly how this will work in the narrative, you join a different faction. You choose your second faction, and then you play through a special like new game plus leveled up version of their content. And then you finish that one, you play through the third one, so you can see everything on one character. And that means potentially that there's just a metric shitload of things to do. And that has recently become the subscription justification, right? That you want to pay monthly for this because you're going to be playing it forever. I don't think that's acceptable, and I don't think it's true, and I don't think it's a good excuse, basically, anymore. I wouldn't pay a subscription for a scripted PvE game. So while they might try it, I think it would be a huge mistake.
What's weird about having those 3 factions which you switch between later in the game is that when you start the game, you're not choosing which is your favourite faction. You're going to choose which faction you're going to later betray, which is a kind of weird kind of
I don't know
choice.
how they're going to do it. I mean, you stay, for PvP purposes, you remain your original faction.
And
when you are leveling through those other factions, the only players you're with are members of your faction who have made the same choice as you.
I see, okay.
So it's like an instance kind of separate.
Right.
I don't know what the narrative justification is going to be. I've got my suspicions, but I can't guess without spoiling some stuff that I've seen.
Right.
So, yeah, it's almost like it is kind of... I mean, I think, faction choices are kind of interesting as it is, because they've divided up the Elder Scrolls world, which is always already tremendously popular, into sort of clumps of 3 races. So if you really, really like, high elves, or you're going to join the Almari Dominion, because that's where they are, right? And so they've got to be very careful to kind of shuffle the deck such that they don't end up with an imbalance. And I think it's always kind of interesting to make people make a decision that's that big in the first 5 minutes that they're playing the game. Again, going back to the decisions you make. Although I think it maybe suffer that a little bit less because of how open their character creation is. But yeah. But as for payment models, the smart move would be a paid-for box, because they'll get far more people who just liked Skyrim or whatever, which is a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that would be the best option, and I think it makes financial sense for them, and I think it's the best thing for gamers. So
yeah. So if they don't do it, if you're listening, ZeniMax Online Studios, don't fuck it up.
Alejandro Del Fuego asks, is now a good time to buy a graphics card? No. I mean, there's never a good time to buy a graphics card, because there is always a new graphics card just around the corner. Now is a fairly reasonable time. You're probably not going to get any big changes until nearer Christmas, and you probably don't want to wait 6 months. It's probably a little bit too long.
I mean, I imagine a top-end PC now will be fine for whatever the next generation of consoles.
Yeah, it's going to be, if you buy one now, it will last you at least 2 years, I would reckon.
Our tech writer was of the opinion recently that they aren't going to release new silicon, either NVIDIA or AMD, until next year. So what you're going to get for the rest of this year are souped-up high-end versions, reconfigurations of existing technology. Yeah. So you're probably better off, buying that stuff. I mean, we've kind of probably topped out, and the kind of remaining cards to be released are just going to be, crossfire stuff and cards which slap several GPUs onto the same PCB and other crazy fucking shit like that.
Get the one that has a dragon on a box.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Dragons.
Or a lady on a bike.
Yeah. Like a futuristic biker wasteland lady sometimes. Sometimes it's a fairy.
I like the sexy fairy with a really well-drawn meniscus on her eyes.
What's a meniscus?
It's the surface tension of the water.
Oh, yes, it is.
You can see it on her eyes. Anyway, sorry, next Twitter question.
Gaming's top meniscus.
That's a
top 10 menisci.
We could totally do like top 10 graphics card box art. That would be amazing.
Yeah, because they are so universally awful.
Yeah.
My game track. Also, I mean the names of the things. My case for my PC might be related to a question earlier on actually. Is a Sigmatech Utgard, and it's just a good black PC case, and in itself is not particularly ostentatious. I bought it because it's it's a tower case, it's well ventilated, and it's simple. But the box it came in has a whole kind of fantasy diorama up the side of it, because I kept the box because you move the PC around in it, and it looks like I'm transporting Mordor. Like it's got like a massive fortress with lava erupting out of the walls and an enormous skull castle, and like this like sort of barren plain stretching off into the distance where there's another volcano and like armies marching to war, and it's like this is brilliant. Someone commissioned an artist, maybe in inverted commas, to produce this piece of bullshit fantasy art to sell me.
What did you say the case was called?
The Sigmatech Utgard. The second.
Do we know what Sigmatech Utgard means? What does Utgard mean?
I mean, Sigmatech is the company that makes them.
Yeah.
So, Utgard.
It does sound very Tolkien-esque, doesn't it?
Well, I think God in Old Norse is Earth. Correct me, scholars. Like Midgard is Middle Earth. Yeah. So Ut might. I don't know. I'm just fucking winging it. Might be Underworld, potentially.
Hence the volcano. Well, that would be on the surface. But, it's spewing stuff from the underworld.
Yeah, indeed. It's suggestive of hell.
James Clark asks, fantasy or sci-fi, and why? I prefer fantasy, but feel like I shouldn't because you can do far more things with sci-fi. Can you do far more things with sci-fi?
Well, in as much as...
because you can have time travel and, parallel dimensions and Star Trek. Basically, you can have holodeck episodes where it's Robin Hood now.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes.
It's basically fantasy times everything that will be possible in the future. Whereas fantasy is fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like really grounded fantasy.
Urban fantasy?
I do like urban fantasy, but
what's urban fantasy?
Like things like Sandman or John Constantine stories or
Murakami.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think I hate bad urban fantasy, and we've ranted about this before on the podcast. My dislike for the Secret World. I hate bad urban fantasy more than almost any other kind of pastiche, simply because I think probably the pool of really good urban fantasy writers is narrow enough that when people are aping those writers, it's painful, as opposed to, if someone apes Tolkien or the ideas Tolkien has brought into the world, those ideas are so diffused among fiction that you can kind of, I don't really mind, right? Like if a D&D source book or something, or a Forgotten Realms novella is a bit generic, I'm not blaming a particular, I'm not thinking about particular authors, I'm thinking of a genre, whereas when someone apes Neil Gaiman or China Mieville, I don't know that's the surname. You can tell, and it's sort of like it's just, I find it grating. But I really like grounded fantasy. Like I hadn't know anything about Game of Thrones or hadn't read the books, or the TV show hadn't started when I played Dragon Age Origins. But the thing that really impressed me about Dragon Age Origins was how well thought through all of its systems were, just as a fiction. Like its magic is. There are rules, like hard rules in place for how magic functions in that universe that are really interesting, that drive both the mechanics of the gameplay, is why I recommend people play with friendly fire on, because then the magic spells do reinforce everything you're told about magic in the game, which is that it is dangerous and then it gets people killed. And but also those rules are kind of like integral to the story and also prevent it from just being this kind of like whimsy that's used for whatever the writer wants to happen.
It's this thing, the equivalent of hard science fiction, which is what people liked in part about Mass Effect 1 as well, was that it's science fiction about how the interstellar travel and spaceships and so forth all worked, was well thought through. And then people were very annoyed by Mass Effect 2 for forgetting and breaking some of its own rules.
Oh, I didn't realise Mass Effect 1 was considered half sci-fi. It seems to. I mean,
super detailed. Like, in the kind
I'm
of
sure. It's just on the surface. It superficially looks like lots of humanoid races with funny foreheads, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of hallmark of not very hard sci-fi.
But yeah, I mean, Mass Effect 1, people sort of forget actually that the Reaper thing, given that, by the time you get to Mass Effect 3, Reapers are there on the box as the threat, and even if you don't know what they are, you kind of know what their deal is. That's why, spoilers for Mass Effect 1, actually, no, but seriously, like, people aren't playing, they should. Like, people forget that it was actually a twist in Mass Effect 1 when it turned out that there hadn't just been one galactic civilization, there had been many. And they get wiped out every 50,000 years. It becomes so integral to the story later on that people forget that it was originally a twist. But that's the pulling the rug out of your assumption that something is soft sci-fi simply because the races look the same is the reveal that there have been entities picking and choosing which races survive, and it is not a coincidence that it's the races that they can manipulate because they are bipedal and blah 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 blah, which is kind of a clever way of answering the. Star Trek's tried something similar with the kind of common ancestor thing.
It always feels like kind of not quite retconning, but
you've got to deal with it some way, and this is how they chose to deal with it, kind of thing. But there's loads of really cool stuff in Mass Effect. This was really kind of lost, like most spaceships, the decks being vertically aligned, so that a spaceship that looks like a battleship or whatever, an aircraft carrier flying through space, is actually a skyscraper in terms of where the floor is aligned. Because it makes more sense from a gravity point of view to be standing in the direction, so the floor is pointing towards the engines, so that the thrust from the engines will contribute to the artificial gravity. Like, that's just sort of one of the things Mass Effect 1 threw out that's completely forgotten by the time it actually shows you the interiors of those ships later on. But it's interesting stuff. I like that stuff. I think it's possible maybe to be too caught up on detail and to be nitpicky about this thing, but I think it really helps sell a world.
It's nice when it's there, and you can, when you lift up the rug, the floor is still there underneath it. So are we saying that we prefer sci-fi, but we also like some fantasy too?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, the thing is, if you're falling back on any genre, then that's an excuse for not using your imagination, generally speaking. I think you can do good fantasy stuff which isn't beholden to the Tolkien template. I think you can be very lazy as well, but you can be very lazy in sci-fi as well. Yeah. The only thing is that there are fewer strict templates for sci-fi, I think, or there are more templates for sci-fi, whereas everything has its seeds in Tolkien. Well, majority of fantasy writing has its seeds in Tolkien, I'd say.
I like, I guess I like fantasy with the rigor of science fiction. There's a book series I was going to mention, actually, but unfortunately have completely forgotten what the name of the author is, other than David.
He's great.
Yeah, Dave. You know Dave? But there's a book series that starts with a book... not Dave Foster Wallace. But yeah, I mean, his fantasy books were strange. Really, very footnotey. Like Tolkien, actually. Weird.
It is weirdly science fiction-y and...
Well, there is... I mean, I guess Infinite Jest has a science fiction...
David Eddings?
No.
David Sedaris. David...
I like David
I'm not going to remember, but I do remember the name of the first book.
David Seaman, very good goalkeeper.
Yeah. There's a book called Acacia, which was the first... It's as in the tree, which is the first fantasy novel I read in maybe about 10 years. I read it when I was about 5 years ago now, but I think there's a couple of books into a series now. But the reason I liked it was because it is non-Eurocentric fantasy. It's sort of grounded in a bunch of other ways as well, which it is early on. But, there's only one of the fantasy kingdoms or races in it are white people. And they are weirdos from the north that no one understands. The sort of Central Empire is more like the Ottoman Empire, Turkish. That it's deliberately written based on kind of mythology, the mythologies it's pulling from, and the kind of such systems of government that it's based in. It's not European kings and castles and dragons and things. It's sort of African. There's a lot of the origin of magic is Africa, or the fantasy equivalent of Africa, which is really interesting and kind of much more again. Because that almost has a more science fiction aspect to it as well, because it's like sort of rearranging the pieces for their own sake.
That's what sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I often think that...
I'll put a link in the show notes when I remember who the guy's called.
Fantasy is... people basically want kind of like they want people to act. They want the characters to be and behave as they would from kind of modern Western psychologies. And yet... They don't want narrative causality, so they want magic and other things which can be just thrown in there to change the direction of the plot at will, and it can very easily feel lazy. I think
it can feel empty is the thing when there is no, as you say, causality or even kind of meaning behind the things put in place, or even if it's an allegorical meaning, or sort of, playing with the present.
Fucking love Game of Thrones, though.
Yeah.
Even though he does some kind of fairly inexcusable causality-breaking things, I think, George R. R. Martin.
I haven't read the books at all.
No, I wasn't going to say any spoilers at all, but you can just tell in the way that he writes that he's hoofing it, I think, a lot of the time. But, yeah.
As we all, though, to be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's got the right to hoof it, if he's hoofing it so successfully. Good
Indeed.
hoofing, George.
Good hoofing.
Good hoofing.
Podcast title.
Good top hoofing.
I was going to say that we didn't have a good short phrase for the title yet. Good hoofing might be it.
We'll see.
We've still got no ways to go.
We've got a ways to go. Everyone, the thing is, the moment you start trying to think in pithy phrases, the whole thing falls apart. I've found. It's why I talk so much.
More pithy phrases from Twitter, please.
Viv Baker asks, what is the most inventive way you have killed someone/thing in games? Which is a difficult question.
Yeah.
Killed so many, Martin. So many.
What have I become?
Press X to look at
Jason.
hands. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a particular example. The thing is, I can recall going, ha 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 ha, that was funny, many, many, many times over the last 30 years playing games, and now I can't think of any.
There's lots of good scripted deaths. I mean, you can kill a guy in Oblivion if you're doing the Dark Brotherhood questline by dropping, I think it's like an elk head on his head, like you rig it to fall off the wall. Hitman Blood Money is filled with great things. I still love that you can replace the prop gun in a theatre performance with a real gun, so that one of the actors actually shoots and kills one of the others during the performance. That's great. But those are scripted things rather than things I orchestrated myself.
There's this isn't maybe if there are any Dota players listening, this won't necessarily be surprising, but there's a very trolley thing to do in Dota that I really like. Which is there's a character whose ultimate ability makes someone stop bleeding profusely, and the further they move from the point where the ability starts on them, the more damage they take. So essentially, it's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. And there's an item that you would never normally build on a character like this guy. I think he's an agility carrier, Bloodseeker, who I believe is an agility carrier, which is a kind of a staff for mages called a Force Staff. And a Force Staff gives you sort of mana regeneration, all sorts of magey stuff, but it also has an active ability that allows you to move yourself or another character you target on to sort of shunt them maybe 1,000 units in one direction. So you can use it to scoot out of the way of danger or scoot up cliffs and things. And so if you've got the spare money, my favourite thing to do is to run around as the guy who makes people bleed to death, and then put the bleed thing on them, and as they stay still to avoid the damage, just shunt them off somewhere. With this, and it's it's a fairly common combo for people who play that character a lot. But it is also very funny, and it feels like a complete asshole thing to do. So that'll be just a good way of killing someone.
In Just Cause 2, if you install the mod which makes the tethering device infinite and infinitely strong, you can attach a speedboat to the bottom of a helicopter and then fly the helicopter around using your speedboat below you to knock people off bridges and buildings and smash their cars and cause that to explode and stuff like that. That's pretty cool. Martin, who have you killed and why?
Oh, I don't know. I quite like playing multiplayer games where you can troll your co-op player. Like, for example, in Portal 2, there's endless fun to be had removing light bridges while they're above
oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Just doing it over and over and over again. Over and over again.
Have you ever played it with Owen?
Yep, actually, this was more true the other way around, I have to admit. He was killing me over and over again, and it wasn't quite as funny.
Yeah. I remember Owen and Tim used to play that game in the office on lunch breaks. Get quite angry. Robert Brewer asks, FC Blood Dragon, Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon looks mental, but for so little money it seems misleading that it might be too short. Well, I haven't played it, so I don't know.
So what was the question?
Is it going to be too short, I guess?
Well,
he's worried, and we cannot put his fears to rest, for none of us have played it.
No, I mean,
it's still open world, isn't it?
One of the previews I read did say it might be quite short. It is an open world, but it's only the size of an island from Far Cry.
Yeah, you can do a lot of things. There's animals to hunt and stuff. So, I mean, you know, if you just plan through the single-player campaign, it's probably your own fault.
He's guessing that it's going to be short based on...
You've managed to make that aggressive.
He's worried that it might be short based on it costing so little money. And if it costs so little money, then it doesn't particularly matter to me that it be short.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as it's fun for the 3 hours or whatever it lasts, I don't mind if I only spent £3 on it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
I don't know how
the way
much
to
it
handle
actually
this
does
is to wait for reviews as well.
Yes, and we will have one along shortly. Rich asks, how many in-game toilets have you flushed in your lifetime?
All of them.
Yeah, an awful lot. Not all of them, but at least one in any room which has flushable toilets.
Many toilets. What's your favourite video game toilet?
I like the toilet in the bathroom on CS Militia, which is a Counter-Strike map. It has a poo in it, and if you shoot the poo, it does a little explosion.
That's pretty cool. I thought this was going to be better than that, but it might not be. In Sleeping Dogs, there's a toilet in one of the clubs that you can go into, and there's a man pissing into it, except he doesn't have a cock, and the toilet's full of sick.
How did you find this out?
I walked in there.
The crouched down between his legs, and
it's he's holding nothing in his hands, and
okay.
piss is coming out of his his
nothing.
trouser model. But yeah, I've not seen a man without a cock pissing into a puke-filled toilet before. At least not in video games, anyway.
I was going to say the toilet on the captain's quarters of the Normandy in Mass Effect 2 and 3, because I didn't notice it was there, because the door is kind of in a place you wouldn't necessarily wonder, until my third playthrough of Mass Effect 2.
You must have been bursting
by the strictures of my own role playing in these games means that Shepard was fucking dying by the time he got it. But also, it manifests one of my favourite things about video game toilets. We should put a link in the show notes actually to colleague Andy Kelly's video game toilets Tumblr, where he documents these.
Also, there's a video game stairs blog now. I don't know if that is also by our esteemed colleague Andrew Kelly, but I'd imagine it's inspired by it.
Yeah. Maybe, which is that using a toilet in video game land just means flushing the toilet, right? Like this is sort of the shorthand is it just skips whatever you would do, just straight to the flushing phase of the event, which is sort of one of those interesting little rules that maybe like people being able to eat very quickly.
The only good thing about the new Duke Nukem Forever game, not the new Duke Nukem Forever game, the old Duke Nukem Forever game,
the Duke Nukem Forever game.
Yes, was that you could legitimately piss into the toilet, and you could do so indefinitely. That was more fun than playing the rest
of an indefinite piss. Can you though?
I've had some pretty long pisses before. I could only imagine that it would get better over time.
I just remembered another one. Slave to God, Stephen Lavell's clubbing sim, for lack of a better word. It's very abstract, but you go to the bathroom, and the second you walk in through the door, you start to pee, and so you can't help but just get it all over the floor, as per every club I've ever been to, which is nice.
Yeah, don't get tomorrow.
Yes, but I'll be peeing solely in the ball. Jop Croix asks, "Seen the PC Gamer HQ is on fire. Used the items from the last game you played to escape." Well, last game I played was Monaco, so I'm going to go the mole, and I'm going to blow a hole in the wall and leave.
Well, I suppose the last game I played, Starseed Pilgrim, I'll grow some blocks out the window and escape that way.
You're not saying in love with that idea.
No, it's kind of boring, isn't it?
Let's choose a different...
Can I choose a different game?
Yeah.
No, I think I'll go with that.
Chris.
Other games.
The game I was
useful.
playing was Tribes Ascend, so I'm going to use the boost pack, I think it's called, the one that allows you to instantly expend all your energy into forward momentum, very useful for pathfinders, to throw myself forward out of a window. The office is sort of near a car park, I guess, on one side. I'm trying to think of the different angle. Actually, out of our window, it would get us onto kind of like the roof of the lobby. So I'm going to ski off the roof of the lobby, and then go out sort of sideways, sort of at a diagonal angle, almost towards this building we record the podcast in from the future office. And then as I hit the ground coming off the roof of the lobby, throw an impact nitron grenade slightly down and to the right, which will put me on a path sort of down that road that runs parallel next to the multi-story car park. And from then I should have picked up around 200 kilometers an hour, and the world's my oyster.
Pretty good. I just remembered that the last game I played wasn't Monaco. It was Surgeon Simulator 2013.
How's that going to help you getting out of burning building?
Well, I'm pretty damn screwed at this point. I'm gonna use my arm to pick up a hammer
uselessly at the
and
air.
then paw and flop pathetically against the window until it smashes slightly in the corner. And I'm going to jam my hand into the glass, grab onto it, and pull until it comes loose. And then I'm gonna, well, I can't really walk anywhere. All I can do is move my arm.
You could wave your arms for help.
I'm gonna wave out the window to someone in the street until they come and get me.
I'm going to change my vote. I'm going, since the last game I played was actually a game for review currently under embargo, which has a flaming building sequence in it. I am going to casually walk out of the flaming building knowing that the peril is entirely scripted.
There we go. Games criticism and an answer all at once.
That's what we aim for. Entertainment and education.
Richard Lewis asks, what do you think Bioshock Infinite salts taste like? And I'd just like to say, none of us are allowed to say salt.
Sambuca.
Which one? Or do they all taste like Sambuca?
Oh no, I mean the salts are the
Oh, sorry, yeah,
resources
you're
that
right.
you. I mean the actual tonic. I mean you go into what tonics taste like. Which sorry, is it tonics? Vigors.
Vigors. Yeah.
What the vigors taste like.
I think we got a cocktail menu through from I don't know some PR agency telling us to make different things. Really.
For some reason, I'm convinced the salts themselves would taste like sambuca. I have no idea why that is. Or ouzo, like some Mediterranean clear spirit that's flammable.
I kind of feel like the Vigors would taste like recorder, like a cider, but not apple cider. Like
No, I think there'd be a bitterness to them.
Because when you use one of the salts dispensers, it actually releases a vapor. So I imagine it'd be more like trying to sniff powdered sherbet being forced into the air. Caustic.
Or like something really lavendery, or like trying to, yeah.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be so much a taste as a smell followed by a powerful tang, I'd imagine.
What would possession taste like? It's green.
pennies.
Pennies, like copper. The taste of copper. That's
seductive.
Yeah. But no, like you can rewind machines.
It's the taste of adrenaline.
When
When you get a lot of adrenaline.
Well, I think it'd be absinthe.
Oh, that's a good call, actually.
That's good.
Green,
Like they both taste the absinthe and
Are
taste
these
of the
just
spoon.
drinks that you both want right now?
Yeah.
You want pennies? You want a glass
I want recorder leg.
Okay. No, I mean I'll go with the absinthe thing. Like, the type of the metallic thing of the spoon, maybe the absinthe spoon.
Are we pretty much convinced that it's alcoholic though?
I think most of our frame of reference for things for beverages
For things that
is
we've tasted.
alcoholic. So this is gonna
No one thinks it tastes like orange juice or anything.
no. Fucking Bronco is a screwdriver.
Carlos Rodro asks, "What's your favorite Final Fantasy game? Also, favorite video game song?" So,
I just want to say for reference, because he's not going to be with us very much longer, and because every single moment of scorn that we get out of him is a tiny little snowflake to be preserved in perpetuity, the look on Martin's face at the words Final Fantasy then embodied several things: distaste, scorn.
I think you've completely misread my undying love for that series.
You went.
I can tell you about video game music. I like the best ever track from any song is the Moon Level theme tune from DuckTales, which is fucking amazing.
I do like the DuckTales TV series, but I've never played the game.
You should look on YouTube. There's all the original. I guess they're MIDI files from the NES games, but yeah, the Moon Level it's great. Sometimes when I get up in the morning before coming to work, I just put that on YouTube. I dance around my flat.
As you're getting ready,
So getting ready, yeah.
like a little 80s movie montage, all of your own.
I do that
and then
too.
you get to school, and the principal's all mad at you, and they girl your legs with some joke.
Well, except the principal IU is never in by the time I get in.
What are you saying?
That you're late every day.
Not every day. Almost every day.
I actually do that sometimes to the Beatus Blues from Super Meat Boy. Yes. Oh, hang on. Yes. Or the club remix of the Binding of Isaac theme. In both cases, excellent chip music by Danny Baranowski, which I'll put links in the show notes too. But that's my dancing around, getting ready in the morning moment of self-realization music.
And what do you feel about Final
I've
Fantasy?
I've never finished one. I liked Crystal Chronicles. I have a story about Crystal Chronicles. Where when I was about 16, Crystal Chronicles was the GameCube, like 4-player co-op.
One of you
action.
had to have to carry a bucket?
Yeah, and one of you had to carry the bucket, and you had to all stand near the bucket because the world was poisonous. And you had a magic bucket which created a radius of safety around you. And it's 4-player kind of isometric action RPG co-op thing. Except one of you couldn't attack at any given time because you were carrying the fucking bucket. And like you have a moment where someone puts the bucket in a lift and people forget to get in the lift and they forget where the button goes and you send the bucket up in the lift and you die because the bucket's gone up the lift and stuff like that. But it had this whole metagame thing where you went back to the home village and you had relationships with your family and you know you had to send gifts home and things and you had these individual things. And I played a bird guy and my dad hated me. And we stayed up all night playing this game and no matter how many gifts I could send back home, my dad would still just fucking hate me. And like, everyone else had an amazing relationship, and they sent gifts from their families, and my dad sent me a fucking potato. And then we got really, really far, and then about 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, someone bumped the power button on the GameCube, and we lost everything.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and that's probably the first I've ever gotten a Final Fantasy game. The other sort of innovative thing about it was that it used the Game Boy Advance as a second screen, kind of, you know, thinking ahead of things like the DS and the Wii U by about a decade, if not more. So I'd probably say Crystal Chronicles, book for the mixture of heartbreak and kind of Pinterest social anxiety that it created in me. So yeah, good work.
Are you still friends with that person?
None of those people anymore. No, it was 4 of us.
Is that person who turned it off still alive?
Oh yeah. We there was I've never seen a group of people collectively grieve like that though before. But then again, they like their families, so you know.
I don't have any strong opinions either way on the Final Fantasy games. In terms of favorite video game song, I listen a lot to the Terry Kavanagh game soundtracks. So the Soul Eye soundtrack for V or the Chipso soundtrack for Super Hexagon. Both great. I'm also rather hot right now for that a cappella version of Gale's
that
theme.
is fucking amazing.
I love that.
Totally.
And I really like the Zelda ones he does as well, because I've always loved the Ocarina of Time soundtrack, all the stuff that you play upon the Ocarina of Time.
Smooth McGroove on YouTube, I think his name is. I'll put a link in the show notes. But yeah, actually I think maybe we should implement a policy that when we are on deadline and facing that final hour, we should probably just play that on a loop in the office.
It is excellent.
It is excellent.
I spent so much of my youth playing Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, so I've heard that music so many times as well. Hearing an a cappella version of it's excellent.
I think myself and Martin Gaston of GameSpot sang our own a cappella version of the Guile theme while playing Dota the other night.
You should start recording your Dota matches, just the Skype calls.
God, no, it's desperately not safe for work. You should. I was in a lane with Matt Lees of Video Gamer last night, and the noises we do like laning together a lot, but we managed to wipe the two people we were laning against twice in the first sort of 6 minutes, and the noises we made upon the second time we did that should be safe for the bedroom, Marines. Well, normally would be safe for the bedroom.
Patrick Thompson asks, do you think that gamers are right to be concerned by dev brain drain into popular game types, i.e. free-to-play? No, I don't think so. I think free-to-play isn't a game type. It's many different types of game. Free-to-play games, I have no problem with them. There's many excellent examples. Dota 2, which we've talked about at length. Tribes Ascend, also very good. Planetside 2. They're just another model for selling many types of games, and there's great examples of it.
And if there were a brain drain, I think that would only indicate that those kind of games are going to get better.
Yes.
And they have.
Yeah.
As it happens.
Yeah.
Probably because of exactly that thing.
Also, I would argue that people who want to make very specific kinds of games are not being, in the main, barred from making those specific kinds of games. At the moment, there are more varied ways of getting paid to make a game at the moment. It doesn't always work, but, you know... only if you're working for a major publisher are you in danger of being sequestered into a free-to-play team that you don't want to be in.
Yeah,
I think there probably is a danger that, like the very top end of AAA game development is going to suffer some kind of talent crisis because unless you're being paid a fucking huge ton of money and you're a talented designer, why would you choose to be a cog in the machine rather than have your own game studio and make indie games? So I think like indie games are the real threat to the AAA games industry. I don't know how much it's wise to mourn that, because it's obviously sometimes a cruel working place, and if it's not financially viable for either the companies or the people working there, then maybe it should diminish.
Go into the West.
And go into the West and remain Galadriel.
John Riccitiello's closing remark. If he closed off with "I will remain Galadriel," then that would make my life.
The room.
Yeah, indeed.
Standing ovation.
Yeah.
It's
beautiful and terrible as the night, John Riccitiello.
Yeah.
I think we've got many podcast titles to choose from now. There are a lot of indie game designers, or a lot of attempted game designers, that I think don't make money. I'm not sure how viable indie games design actually is for many people. And quitting your job at a AAA developer, if you've got a family, for example.
Oh, it's definitely risky. I think it's, but I just think I don't think that you're going to see. I think if there was going to be any part of the industry which is going to be at more risk of draining brains, then that's going to be probably doing it for yourself, sister, rather than
It's a thing with to come back to Dota again for all things feedback into Dota, like the Steam Workshop, the people who are making money just selling models for Team Fortress 2. I half think that there are modelers at Valve looking at the amount of money modders are making working on the same game they are and thinking,
why are they doing that?
Yeah, this guy made 200 grand. Well, I don't get paid 200 grand to make hats, but make hats is what I do. Maybe I should quit my job.
I'm one of the most prolific Dota workshop people. I think her name is Nuxie, and I might be hopefully getting people the right sort of code name with the right person. Used to work for Tryon, at least as a freelancer, and do loads of the assets for Rift and things, and her CV is really, really long, and now she makes very popular and very good internet hats. I've spent money on many of her finest internet hats for Wizards.
Excellent. Video games are great. Tendai Dongo asks, what are the specs of your personal rigs? Thanks. I've got an Ultra Triton SE, which is one of Cyberpower's builds. It cost about 500 quid or something like that. In fact, I think they might have invented it for us. I think we asked a bunch of manufacturers to price up £500 rigs, and this was the one that Cyberpower did for us. Probably they already had it lying around.
What is in the rig?
I don't remember. It's a quad-core AMD Athlon. Part of the reason why it was cheap was that actually it's a dual core, but AMD used to sell and probably still do dual cores where they're actually quad cores, but just with two of the cores turned off. So if you know how, you can just turn on the other two cores, and now you've got a quad core one for less money. So it's got that. It's got 4 gig of RAM. It's got a couple of terabytes on the hard drive.
Do you buy that from Cyberpower, did you say?
Yeah, it's this in the same case as the one you've got.
I think it's a weird thing. You know how when women have been together for a long time, their menstrual cycles unify. I think it's true of game nerds as well, that they go through the cycles of buying new PCs tends to be the same. And I think we went through a spate where everybody in the PC Gamer office bought pretty much the same PC over maybe a span of like 6 months. So I think I've got the exactly same thing as you, but maybe just 6 months iteration on it or something. But what we play on at work is an i5 processor, and it's got I think it's a GTX 580 Li or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah,
and a 8 gigabyte of RAM.
Yeah,
and SSDs.
It pretty much eats everything.
Yeah,
completely. I've not found anything to throw at it that would cause it to stutter yet.
The thing is, I'm about to upgrade again at home, I think, because my computer is starting to overheat and crash and fall apart, basically. No, it's not really struggling with any modern games. It's just breaking. So I think it's wear and tear, maybe time to replace.
Mine is a Zigmatech Utgard 2. Which contains that's just the case. This is a self-build, which contains it's a high-end i5. I've forgotten exactly which one. 760 Intel quad core, 8 gig of RAM, 8 Radeon HD 6970 with 2 gig of RAM, a terabyte hard drive. The only thing and again, it eats everything. I haven't found anything I can't throw at it. The only thing I'm missing is an SSD, which is kind of the next thing on my radar, because I think the hard drive is starting to show signs of unhappiness, and my external hard drive just bit the dust, which is a shame because it's got all my screenshots on it. So I need to get another one and try and do some disk recovery magic on it. I think probably I can get the data back. I think it's just a wobble indexing issue maybe. That's my rig.
It's interesting that Chris remembered his rig better because he built it himself, but also that we just couldn't really remember all of the parts that were in ours because hardware is less relevant than it used to be. There would be a time when I would have been able to tell you everything that was in my machine, but now it's
one
just
of the
like
few machines that I haven't built myself. And I
Yeah,
think that's
same
probably
here.
the reason I don't know, because I didn't want the hassle of knowing, so I haven't. It's not
Yeah.
something I remember. And usually the times when I'm looking at specs as well is when I'm writing what specs I use to review a game on. That's often at work, so it's
This is true. Adam Dawes asks, if you could have any game creature, either a species or a specific character, as a real-life pet, which would you choose?
Surely you've got some little buddies in Dota that you would choose to bring along, Chris?
Actually, yes. I would probably have the Badger courier from Dota. I do love that fucking thing. He's the best thing about the Badger, because you have a courier, is the little critter that kind of brings items to teammates in the field, so you don't have to go back to base to pick up things you bought from the shop.
Barry Badgington.
Barry Badgington's. Mine isn't called Barry Badgington's. I don't. He doesn't have a name. But there are many, many excellent couriers in Dota, and one of the best sort of opportunities for people to express their creativity as workshop people is every courier has a ground form and a flying form. And and kind of, if you're feeling kind of unimaginative, you just stick wings on the ground form of some kind. But the best couriers do have kind of really ridiculous flying forms. Like there's a chicken courier who's just a normal chicken when he's on the ground, but when he gets his flying form, someone traps 2 fireworks to him, and he jetpacks around, and he gets little flying aviator goggles. It's pretty boss. The Badger is my favourite because someone straps. He gets balloons, and he's just attached to 3 balloons, and he's holding a little propeller. And he's the only courier who looks kind of bewildered by his own flying form, because he's sort of dangling there with his little pannier bags to deliver people. I would totally have that as a pet.
I'm a fucking badger. What the fuck am I doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. He bumbles well, and his running animation is really nice. But yeah, I would totally have a little badger with balloons that flew around and delivered me things.
Martin?
I don't know if I'd pick any animal, but a pet that in a game that I've been fond of so was probably Pokey the cat from the first Guild Wars game, because I was a ranger and I had a cat. I was very fond of him. Complete idiot. Used to run off and aggro all kinds of things, but fond of him. He was named after the cat from The Incredible Machine, which is an early kind of what are they called? Those kind of big machines that do complex things that are kind of
not Van de Graaff.
That's like 2 different names for them you can use.
Sorry,
I've forgotten
say that
both.
again. What? I wasn't really listening to what you were saying while you were talking. You mean Rube Goldberg? I wasn't listening at all to what you said, but that works out to what you were talking about.
It's like a game where you kind of make incredible machines,
Yeah,
and you
I'm
could
familiar
use
with it.
a cat as part of the mechanism,
Okay.
and it was called Pokey. There you go.
I really like your little robot sidekick in Beneath a Steel Sky. I think his name's Joey. He's just a motherboard, and you can plug him into different things. And the first thing you plug him into is like a automated vacuum cleaner, and he rides around in that for a lot of the game, making really sarcastic comments and mocking you. Really, really liked him when I was a kid.
Quite like a snark as well. I like a snark.
Snarks are pretty cool, but a little bit dangerous to just have lying around.
Totally swap mine out for a motherfucking Charizard.
That would be awesome.
You can ride them. You can teach them fly.
You can teach them fly.
Well, no, that's what it's fly is the move.
Yeah, it's
Right?
true.
It's like HMO3, I think. Or 1. I can't remember.
I really like Bulbasaur as well. Don't shrug your shoulders like you don't know Pokemon, Martin.
I don't know Pokemon.
What?
I don't know Pokemon.
You never played a game?
No, it was just I was just old enough for it to be think I was too cool for it at school. Obviously,
yeah.
I wasn't.
I was 11. I imported the American version. Because I had been playing for about maybe 6 months longer than everyone else when it finally became a craze in the UK. I went through the 2 weeks of my brief relevance as a secondary schooler. It was weird.
I thought I was too cool for it, but did not let that stop me. Many years of fun. Alex Vance, Alex Vance asks, what do you guys think about the recent trend of failing game launches? Presumably
Trend?
He's referring to SimCity and the like.
Yeah, I would refer to World of Warcraft and,
Any online game since going back forever has had a troubled launch.
Really?
Which is not to excuse what EA managed to fuck up so dramatically with SimCity. But
even before online games, since about 1999, it hasn't been uncommon for games to launch with many, many bugs and have great problems that will then either patched and patches distributed versus File Planet versus PC Gamer cover discs.
Yeah.
And then versus...
I remember being delighted to get an issue of PC Gamer in which fixed a game that I wanted to play and bought ages ago.
And then Game of the Year editions as well, which is that's why people made them, was that they could bundle all the patches that fixed all the bugs.
Up now version. Okay.
But what do we think of failing game launches generally? They're fucking terrible.
I think it's a recent thing. I think it's
right.
baffling that it's still happening to some extent. Bugs are one thing, rush launches or whatever or another. The fact that when you're running a server-dependent game, whether it's SimCity or an MMO, honestly, I don't know what the numbers involved, specifically what the budgets involved are. But if you want your game to be successful, if you anticipate that it might be successful, even in the slightest, surely a significant overspend on server capacity. Because a lot of these things are like on Amazon EC2. Like they're on massive, great big sort of like cloud bank, sort of standard services where expanding your capacity is just a case of putting more money in the machine, basically. You know what I mean? Like EA just needed to put a couple of million more 20p's in the meter, frankly, as far as I'm concerned. And I wonder if there's... I don't really understand the business decision that says that it's not worth to spend more early to make sure you get that good rep. You know what I mean? Yeah,
I imagine it's not quite as simple as just spending more money.
I imagine there's...
Stop shooting my straw man.
It's the logistical problem of the game launching in many different countries and you needing, therefore, servers in many different countries. And I imagine you probably have to go to different companies in order to get the server resource you need.
Launching a game is bound to be a massive, massive undertaking, a massive logistical nightmare, and things are almost certain to go wrong. It's about the areas. There are places where you can easily improve your service, I think, which lots of companies regretfully do not attend to.
Yeah,
but
the problem is that they keep all making the same mistakes.
Yeah,
there needs to be a conference for game network server administrators or whatever. That just where they get together and go, hey, this is what we learned 10 years ago. Sorry we didn't tell you before now, but...
Yeah, I mean, just think it's been happening for so long that you should see it coming, If you're, you should just build your game around network, assuming that you'll use network tech that you can scale up and down relatively quickly. Scale it up a lot and then scale it down a bit.
And also, you think these things, with the advent of massive open betas now, would probably be a thing of the past to some extent. I mean, have those troubles during beta and like Planetside did maybe, and then when you actually finally launch.
I think betas are hugely misleading though.
They have come with a host of other problems, but
I think the scale of people that you'll get for a beta is probably tiny compared to what you'll get for the final game, because a lot of people see beta and just can't be fucked with it. They'll just wait, or they won't hear about it because it'll be announced online. And a lot of people who are going to buy your game don't read games websites, don't follow you on Twitter. They just know your game. They're going to buy it when they see it in the store. And I don't think people necessarily know that within the games business either. And that was something that Max has said, actually, that the numbers that they saw when the game came out were 10 times what they had for beta. It caught them by surprise. Because I think people think that, there's a measurable relation between them, and it's probably times 10 and not times 2 or 3 or whatever people think it is. Either way, there's a bunch of valuable learnings that I think these people could take on board and then implement going forward. But I understand but I understand that that's difficult within organisations which are burdened with bureaucratic shitfuckery. But anyway, Matt Turner says, what game have you bought in a Steam sale and most wanted to play but have just never found the time to? Mine's Witcher 2. Well, I've never bought a game in a Steam sale.
Graham, this is where you have to tread really carefully around the biggest first world problem you have.
Actually, I bought a game. It wasn't in a Steam sale, but it was cheap. I bought Kane and Lynch 2 on Steam. and I didn't launch it for a year, and then I did launch it, and I played the first mission, and I haven't gone back to it yet, and I keep meaning to, but I just haven't got around to it.
Mine might be Witcher 2, actually, because I've mentioned several times on the podcast my inability to get through The Witcher 1, but I do own The Witcher 2 from a Steam sale. Probably also L.A. Noire, which I picked up on a Steam sale, and never actually got around to playing.
Not missing that much.
No, but that's the thing, is it's such an interesting failure in some ways.
Yeah. Actually, it is probably worth playing just to...
That's what people said about Caitlin Lynch too. I mean, I think that's the... Like, there are... my colleague Michael Gapper stresses that the game is genius, and that everything that it does deliberately, and that it's a very smart, thoughtful game.
Far Cry 3, it's shit on purpose argument.
And he certainly makes a good case for why it's an interesting game, and a game worth playing. Yeah. And I kind of think, I like interesting games. I like learning about games. I play, try and go out of my way to play things I wouldn't otherwise play. But then sometimes I just can't be fucked. Sometimes I just get a bit tired and would much rather stare at GIFs on the internet. And so that's what happens a lot of the time when I go home at night.
Laundry otters.
Yes.
I bought Chivalry fairly recently, and the only thing I played of that is the tutorial. And somehow, although I really, really wanted to play it, I just didn't get around to it. I don't know why not. Maybe I will one day, who knows?
I think this should be called like the THQ curse or something like that. And the number of THQ games, which everyone's like, it gets 8s and 85s, and people are like, it's good. It's not great. It's good, but you should play it because it's fun. And then I play the first hour of it and think, hey, this is fun, and then never go back. And that's maybe why they don't exist anymore, because there's no sense of necessity to buying their games.
Again, back to the old 5-minute problem. First 5 minutes.
Yeah, this is true. Graham Strachan, it's a good old Scottish name, asks, the Invincible Imp bug in Doom 2 terrified me. Have any game bugs ever scared or entertained you a lot?
Yes and no. Well,
maybe.
Well, it's whether it's scaring is really the exact thing. But like, I remember back when I used to do mapping for like Quake and things like that, and I used to get, I think they're called BSP errors, and there was a particular effect called the Hall of Mirrors, which is not dissimilar to being the look of it is not dissimilar to having that kind of jarring fragmentation of reality that you get when you look at the edge of your glasses if you wear glasses. Sometimes I'd be walking around in reality, and I'd spot this kind of weird visual dissonance. And because I've spent the last 20 hours playing around in the Hammer editor, I would just think, oh, it's a BSP error. I was like, oh, no, oh God.
I know that error well because I used to do modding as well, but I can't think of any bugs that have scared me, but there are many that are entertaining. Boiling Point is famous for its flying cheetahs, panthers. That was flying panthers, or Soldner, which when you loaded it up would go Soldner on his menu screen with like a grim German accent. But it had jeeps that would drive around, bash into a building, instantly explode, and when the smoke cleared, they would have turned into a box and stuff like that.
The bug, I think I may have mentioned this on the podcast before, but the bug that scared me so much that I couldn't play the game anymore was a bug in Mountain Blade Warband with ATI cards, where all female characters in the game, villagers, members of your own warband or whatever, had their face textures misaligned, around the radius of their head. So their chin texture was where their eyes should be. And their face was sort of underneath their hair by this point, kind of stretching to the back of their head. And because the shadows were painted on, so the shadow under your neck was a sort of painted on part of the texture rather than something based on the dynamic lighting. This gave all women the sort of terrible blurry beard, and a chin for a nose, and then but their eyes are part of the model, right? But without the eye texture. They're just these sort of black gaping holes. So it turned all women in the game into these kind of like weird faceless terrors from the beyond. And like you go into villages and you'd sort of click on a random shopkeeper and she'd turn around. What the fuck is that? And so I stopped playing it because, but partly because like it obviously would regularly take you out of the the immersion of being in a kind of medieval world, but substantially because of how fucking terrifying it was. I don't think they fixed that. And it was on all Radeon cards at the time.
That sounds excellent.
Good bugs.
Draco Silver asks, have you heard that Starbound started taking pre-orders and has made nearly $1 million without having to use Kickstarter? No, I had not heard that.
No, I had not heard that.
I had not heard that.
That is an impressively large figure, and I demand evidence.
Links in the show notes.
I can't remember which one Starbound is. It's
Neither
not Star Drive, and it's not Star Forge,
or
it's
Starseed Pilgrim,
or Star Siege Tribes.
Found, I think it's the one that's like Terraria in space.
Oh yeah, it is.
Oh, by the same guys that did Terraria.
I don't know.
Because there's also Star Forge, which is like Minecraft, but you can go to space.
No,
that's
Star
the
Forge.
3D first-person shooter one. And Star Drive, I think, is the turn-based strategy game.
No,
Starbound.
Starbound is definitely the 2D one, right?
Yeah,
2D side on.
Side-scrolling.
It's Terraria, but it's kind of like a
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's by the guy that did
$1 million for that. Wow.
Good for them.
Yeah, good for them.
Kids love blocks.
It looks pretty cool. I mean, it looks cool, but
I think it's like
the
Terraria,
things I think
but
cool
you
rarely
build.
make that much money. So.
I think it's like Terraria, but you build spaceships and then you go to other planets and then you can like settle there and then explore more and then go to another
That sounds
planet.
boss.
I think it's like that. Developers, name your games better. Give them more interesting names. Stop putting star as the first word.
However,
Star Wars got there quite a bit before you did, and then Star Trek got there even before that. Star Wars was 1977, Star Trek was the 60s. Come on, Chris.
Face. I was a Star Trek fan as a kid. But also, but more interesting names is not an excuse to have your name in the format X thing of Y. Because that you've fallen into a different trap there, which is syntactic ennui.
I think game names entirely are fucked at this point. There's many that are actually any good.
Super Hexagon.
There we go.
That's a well-named game.
Yeah, but what about VVVVVV or V?
That's
or
memorable.
V?
Memorable.
It is memorable.
It is memorable, but it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
then the discourse of the internet is primarily text-based, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
But
Well,
you,
this is true, Martin.
but you try congratulating Terry Kavanagh when you're pissed.
yeah.
I really loved you.
Spit
Exactly.
flying all over.
Spit on Terry Kavanagh.
He's so
don't.
nice. He probably wouldn't even complain. He'd probably just give you a
Well, actually,
apologetic
maybe
look.
years of having people accidentally spit on him while trying to congratulate him on the success of will have inured him against the negative social implications of being spat on. Good work, Terry. Games can change people's behaviour.
He's built up an immune system that can handle many kinds of liquids.
Foreign chemical. I once saw that man try and steal a pot plant from a club. Anyway.
Did he succeed?
No,
No, he didn't actually.
Do you think he's not past the statute of limitation to get
I
arrested?
don't know. Depends if Chris was about to describe a heinous crime of some sort.
Well, I mean, no pot plant was moved in the end. It was very heavy. He might have just been fondling it. It's Franz. I don't remember. I was not in a
Franz
state,
is a good
state
word.
to
We'll
regularly
move on
remember
from
this
that.
evening.
Fondling it's Franz. Max Ursa.
Fondling it.
Max Ursa asks, "Me again." I don't remember this person. Need to get
He's a member
new...
of our Planetside 2 Guild. He regularly asks questions. I would have known, Max. I'm sorry.
Well done at beating the other people at the Planetside 2 thing.
Oh yeah,
Good for
moral
you.
victory. Yeah, that was we recap. We played RPS's community at Planetside. We had around 80 people. They had upwards of 300.
A small, organised militia.
Like
Overthrown.
Spartans.
Yeah, although they were 300 and we were 80. But yeah,
Yeah, well, you know,
Like-
proportionally.
yeah,
palatable
proportional
to-
Spartans. We are proportional Spartans.
Well, I hope not, because
It was
otherwise that was like
I mean-
the Spartan story is about 300 people fighting 900 people. That's not that impressive.
Okay.
All right, well, whatever. But like the the reason that we can claim victory is simply because no victory condition was ever actually agreed on, which means that by our own standards we won. But no, it was a really good, fun evening. We're definitely going to do it again. Actually, I spoke to Jim very briefly on Twitter about it afterwards, and Jim Rossignol of RPS, and he said he's up for arranging something like it again. There were so many. Planetside is. I think that's maybe the only way I'm ever going to play Planetside 2 going forward. Actually, like only on big operations with the guys, because it makes so much sense when you have those kinds of moments of 80 people rolling off the battle, and I'm just up there in my mosquito dodging through.
Jim Rossignol, former PC Gamer writer who has done nothing of note ever since. That's how we should refer to him.
Catty. I like it.
Meow.
He knows how we feel, really.
Yeah. Congratulations, Jim, for some reason. But no, there was an amazing moment, just to maybe iterate why people should play Planetside, or why people should play Planetside with us. Details on the forum at pcgamer.com.
We should post about it on the main page of pcgamer.com. More.
Okay. Right, boss. Fine, whatever. Tell it to
Don't
the
look
web
at me,
editor.
I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Who are you going to be doing work for, Martin?
I'm going to be working for Jim Rossignol.
Yeah, fuck you. Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm not working for RPS.
What's fun about Planetside 2, Chris?
What I was going to say is there was a very specific moment when our only plan was that on the agreed upon start time, we would roll out towards the front line between our own faction, the Terran Republic, and the Vanu, the RPS faction. We didn't have an agreed base we were going to try and take or anything. We would just roll somewhere. And we'd sent some scouts out and we didn't know where they were either. So we just like, okay, we're going to take this base that is between our warp gate and theirs. And we rolled up down the coast, north coast of Amarish, and rolled immediately into a base, like straight in past the defenses because it was relatively undefended, wiped out everyone who was there. And it all went quite well. And then there's a video on it a video of this moment from the RPS perspective. What looked like upwards of 12 Galaxy massive sort of troop dropship transports, maybe it wasn't them, it was a fuckload plus sort of air support, just came sort of rolling over this hill sort of out of the clouds from the Vanu warp gate, and just sort of filled the sky. And I was sort of closer to the warp gate in my Mosquito at the time than sort of the rest of the air squadron I was in, and I knew that if I ran, I was going to get missile lock and die. So the opening of that entire engagement, and they then dropped on the base, and we then spent the next 3 hours trying to get that base back, right? Like, you know what I mean? The, sort of the scale of the defense, they just parachuted into that thing, was to fly up through their incoming transports, because it's much harder to turn, right? Because from their perspective, if they start turning, they risk crashing into each other. Whereas, so for me, it made sense to just afterburn like through the middle of them. And it was one of those moments that is so much like something from a film.
From a movie.
Yeah, but like, you know, you talk about this bullshit about cinematic games, you know, like, oh, put Ellen Page on the box. Oh, film festivals. Sorry, that's
Who in particular might you be referring to?
This
there,
is the
Chris?
podcast's bi-weekly condemnation of the work and decisions of David Cage.
Lovely man.
David Cash.
Okay. Anyway, moving on. But that one moment, like, admittedly a very particularly hyper movie, but, you know, just feeling of watching, like, almost, you know, you can't see people through the windows, but you're flying so close to them out of your sort of, you know, out of the cockpit window. You do feel like this kind of moment of, shit, I'm right among them, them getting out the other end and just banking to the side and just fleeing was absolutely amazing. But, like, popping off a few shots as I left kind of thing. And trying to make them chase me, actually, because they might crash into each other. James.
Does sound pretty fucking epic.
Yeah.
Well, hello, Max. Thank you for winning the war for us and everything. Good veteran. He asks, 'cause we haven't actually got to that yet. Me again. Need to get a new headset. Thinking getting wireless. Kids plus wires equals yank. Getting expensive. Any suggestions? Well, in the issue that we've just sent to press, we've reviewed 7
PC
such
Gamer
headsets.
253 out May 9th.
Yes. We've reviewed 7 sets of headset. The winner of which I cannot recall the name of off the top of my head. Costs about 75 quid though. It's not wireless, but there are other wireless ones in there, including some which are quite reasonably priced and still give you good audio quality. We'll look up the document and we'll drop a link to the to the one that Dave James, hardware expert, suggests. It's not the winner of the overall thing, but it is
wireless,
the best of the wireless ones. We'll drop it in the show notes for you.
I had a really dreadful experience with a pair of wireless headphones that I can't remember the name of, but I will also push them in the show notes because I fucking hated them. Likewise, I've had a really bad experience with Rocket headphones recently. They've got a particular set. It's one of their lower end ones. They've got like leather. Rather than it being something that goes over your ear, it's more like just a big pad that sits on your ear, and it's leather, and so it actually sticks to your ear. But the main problem with those are that the volume slider is very, very short, so you basically just switch it between off, and you can't hear things anymore because it's loud, and you're deaf. And right now I'm using a pair of Turtle Beach headphones that also aren't very good. So
useful recommendation.
Yeah, just broadly avoid these.
Rich McCormick in the office uses a set of the Old Republic branded Star Wars headphones, which cost 120 quid, and he says that they are the worst things he's ever used of any type ever.
Really? They also look ridiculous.
They're constantly breaking and just losing audio, and he has to plug them and unplug them 6 times in order to get them to pick up sound again. And
the headphones I'm currently using I can't, again, I'll post the brand in the show notes. In the office they don't have a microphone or anything, so they're kind of useful for that. And there's no inline volume control, but also the cable is so short, like less than 50 centimeters, that it doesn't comfortably stretch from from my Tower Cakes PC, which is under my desk, to my head when I'm sat at said PC next to it. And I'm not a tall person, and especially because the PC's on my right and the cable goes in on the left earphone, so I have to kind of have it sort of going across me. But also it means if I move my head, this happens so often now that, like, you guys maybe don't know this from my daily office experience, but if I've moved my head too far, like slightly too far to the left, my headphones unplug from the front jack on the PC. So I'm now able in one motion to replug my headphones in with my right hand under the desk without looking, because I know exactly where it is. Because I have to do it maybe 20 times a day.
Headphones are rubbish. Don't buy them. Just, drown your children and then get speakers.
Don't
He knows. It's Max. My buddy Max. I know him.
You're making this worse.
Daniel Scarum asks, what is your take on Steam selling games in alpha? Isn't it kind of like pre-ordering?
I think this calls for a statement by the editor of PC Gamer.
Well, Daniel, we're going to start reviewing alpha games because we are. This is much easier in writing rather than winging it when I'm talking about official review policy of PC Gamer. But anytime you're asked for money for a game, PC Gamer should be there to give you consumer advice and buyer's advice for whether it's worth your money. And that's the same whether that game is finished or not. In fact, it's more important when the game is unfinished that you have critical third-party information about whether that game is any good, whether it's any fun, whether it's buggy, whether it's worth you getting it now, or whether you should wait until it's further along the development process, and so on. And so in the next issue, 254, on sale June 6th, we're going to start reviewing alpha games and starting with some of those that are available through Steam through the early access system, specifically Prison Architect and Kerbal Space Program as being the two most successful examples at the moment. And so we'll write a bit about what we think. The change from regular reviews is that we won't be putting normal scores out of 100 on them as we normally would. We wanted to find a way to reflect the unfinished nature of those games and sticking a definitive score on the end, even if we were to update it, just feels wrong and it causes a whole bunch of problems. It just gets out of date very quickly as well, in a way that text with its more nuanced approach doesn't. So what we'll do is we'll write a regular review, and then the rating at the end will be a more simple binary system, though we haven't worked out exactly how it will be, what the iconography of it will be or anything yet, but it'll be a binary system to just tell you whether it's worth your time now or whether you should wait and see.
That avoids it getting sucked into Metacritic's grinder as well.
Yeah, the thing is, as soon as we put a score on it, Metacritic take that score and then refuse to update that score, even as we change it. So if we give a game in progress 55, and then by the time it actually hits version 1.0, that's up to 80 or 85 or more, Metacritic don't care. They absolutely refuse to change their rating, which is, well, one of the many problems I have with Metacritic, because it just means that their information is out of date, and they're condemning developers at that point to people not buying their games because of it. But anyway, so yeah, I have no problem with Steam selling these games. It's just the industry and the industry that supports that industry and its gamers need to change and adapt to provide better advice and a better infrastructure around it to stop people getting a raw deal. Do you guys agree? I hope that you do.
Yeah.
Cool.
That seems like the right thing to do. And I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah.
High fives, everyone. The table's too big for high fives.
The next two questions have a little plus symbol in between them, representing the fact that they're related. I'll read them both at once. Rebellious Uno asks, what was the best game never made? And KP asks, what's your dream concept for a game that hasn't been tried in the past? Who wants to go first?
I think Chris wants to go first.
I'm going to totally take the wind out of Martin's wings. Sails. I am the wind. I am the wind beneath your wings, but I'm going to take this wind out of your sails. That's how that works, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what you're trying to say. When did you say what you're going to say? And then we can work out what the metaphor that referred to it was.
The game concept that no one's ever figured out how to make, but everyone wants, is Bioshock Infinite without combat. Like, I would like someone to invent, because I kind of disagree with those arguments that Bioshock Infinite shouldn't have had been a shooter or had combat in it or whatever. Agree that it's problematic, dissonant sometimes, etc., etc., etc. But I very much agree with the point I'm going to steal from my esteemed former colleague, Marsh Davies, that no one's actually come up with a better way of giving the player a reason to explore and interact with a 3D environment in an immersive fashion, ultimately, than the principles of a shooter. And obviously there are gradations of that, like stealthy games and puzzle games and puzzly stealthy shooty games or whatever. But at the same time, basically, yeah, we don't have a kind of system of interesting conflict and progression and sense of meaning and response to action and everything else that's important in a game. And no one has an answer to this, really. Like, people, there's this sort of Dear Esther approach, which is great, but by its nature and by the nature of the things that make it good, extremely limited.
There is a kind of midpoint in Gone Home, which is Steve Gaynor, who was a level designer on Bioshock 2, and he was the lead on Minerva's Den, the DLC for that. And it's doing much more specific narrative-based storytelling than something like Dear Esther, which is free-form, slightly randomized, open, slightly empty environments and stuff like that. It's much more of a specific story, and the way you interact with that world and how detailed that world is closer to the Bioshock Infinite end of things, but there's no combat in. And it's not a perfect solution, but it is a kind of more of a midway point, a step towards something that might be Bioshock Infinite-ish.
Well, it's Bioshock Infinite, but without the combat. it's not that Bioshock is lacking any of the things that Gone Home does.
It's just Gone Home.
Yeah, exactly. Gone Home is just an environment with lots of things written in it that you can pick up and read, and that's cool. I really like Gone Home from what I played of it, but what combat provides is a way of interacting with that 3D space in a completely different way. One which involves multiple dynamic objects, other AI and things like that. And your interaction with them becomes a source of strategy and tactics. And you can't really get that from going around and picking up notebooks.
Yeah.
It could be that you could... the things that people are doing with AI in academia are much more interesting than the things that are happening in games with AI at the moment. There's lots of things with social AI. There's a game called... Prom Night?
Yes, Prom Night.
Prom Night, in which you essentially manipulate the social circle of some kind of American school on prom night, and you have a certain number of objectives, and you go around having conversations with people, which are partly dynamically generated, I think, and it's very It's very open. It's very easily manipulated. Sorry, very dynamic. So it's not like you're going through a set chain of responses. But that kind of thing could be the way of replacing combat and having essentially social replacement for combat. That seems like a complex enough system. But you need some kind of system that you're playing with. Otherwise, you're just not replacing what you like.
It becomes entirely rule based, like the design of the thing. You press the use on thing, you read thing. The most you could be asked to do really is fetch something or go and find some character.
You need a system which generates unpredictable things, which you can then strategize to resolve. And combat is a very ideal kind of fit for that. And conversations aren't that much.
Not in the way that not based on the technology we have.
No, exactly.
I mean, like first-person shooters are a decent parallel to action films in that most of the conflict is resolved through shooting people. So a useful way to think about this is sometimes to look at other genre films, romantic comedies and stuff like that. You get into real difficult areas because it is all social and conversation based, and that's extremely hard. But there are other genre films, like for example, detective fiction, where things are resolved through types of action which aren't speaking necessarily and aren't shooting either. Are there ways in which games could be better taking those genres and finding ways to systematize them in a way where you're interacting with the environment in ways that aren't just putting a bullet through?
Well, here's a point on this. If you actually look at the way action films work and the cliches of action films, almost all conflict resolution in fiction, or at least the kinds of fiction we're talking about, is information-based. It's about who possesses information at key moments and how they choose to utilize it. And in action films, this is the hero pulling the lever that causes the villain who is invulnerable to fall to his death or whatever. You know what I mean? The fact that villains in action movies are never just shot, right? Or only in certain kinds of action movies. The James Bond thing of, it's always a giant drill, right? Like, or something. He never just shoots the baddie in the head at the end.
No.
Right? And it's always because of some information, right? Bond happens to have rolled over and now has the upper hand or, whatever, and pulls the lever. And detective fiction works in exactly the same way. The detective is holding some information that only he possesses right at the end and allows him to solve the crime or the mystery or whatever. And in games, when games try and do this, it's incredibly clumsy, especially in shooters or in combat-based games. And that's manifest in the quick-time event in which you kill the boss in the special way, or the boss fight where you do have to run to the lever on the wall to open the pit that drops the boss into the thing or whatever, right? The more games can't, or the systems aren't advanced enough to allow for interesting play with information, right? Like, in terms of it's why things become super controlled, super rule based, and super binary, because games can't generate new information or different levels or different approaches or different solutions to mysteries in organically in a way that is satisfying. They are aspects of the thing that require a designer's hand and therefore become deterministic. And whenever games do them, it's weird. Whereas just regular gunfights in games can be allowed to breathe and therefore become, more fun.
But a lot of the criticism of Bioshock Infinite seems, and I'm maybe bouncing off your point here rather than actually responding to it, and I'm sorry for that, but a lot of it is that Bioshock Infinite invests a great amount of time in trying to invest you in these emotional conflicts and these characters and stuff that you're dealing with, and then the combat doesn't relate a great deal to that. Whereas in the best action films and so forth and action stories, the conflict is a form of resolution for an underlying emotional conflict that's happening between the same characters. It's not, and now we have a big CG fight scene because we haven't had a CG fight scene for 5 minutes. And we had
there are quite a lot of those films as well.
Those are bad films and they're justly criticised. We had a long conversation at lunchtime about the problem we have with the ending of the Avengers movie, which I won't spoil, but it has that kind of issue. And games are rife with that because they've got to be 20 hours long and have so many different combat scenarios and so forth.
It might be a reason horror games do it slightly better, in that the motivations why you're fighting are very, very readily apparent because there's terrible monsters trying to murder you. Bioshock 1 maybe had that in a way. It's the fight. You don't really, past the beginning of Infinite, you're not really fighting for survival in the same way.
Yeah,
I think it struggles for muddled motivations on your part in terms of you don't really know why Booker decides to murder all these people.
it's why there is a good argument to be made that Half-Life 1 is a better game than Half-Life 2. Half-Life 1, you're fighting to escape the Black Mesa research facility as it gets infested with aliens, and then the government comes in. You're just trying to get out of there.
Whereas
So you're fighting for
Half-Life 2,
survival.
yeah.
Half-Life 2, you've already kind of got out of there. You've been dropped there for reasons you don't understand by a mystical being that can just teleport you anywhere. And then you accidentally start a revolution. Like you break Eli out of Nova Prospect, and then you disappear for a period of months, and when you come back you've accidentally started a revolution in City 17. Like, you have no actual agency in that game. You just kind of fumble your way through it,
Or at the very least, your
and
agency
your
doesn't
personal motivation is
Play game.
yeah, it's just play game.
A comment that the game highlights in the repetition of the phrase "free man" and Breen's criticism of whether you are indeed free, and no, you are not.
Yeah,
If you examine the game design behind it,
yeah,
preempting Bioshock there, in fact.
Yeah. In the most obvious possible
In the
way.
most obvious possible way. Which is, yeah.
But yeah,
To come back to the question, and yeah, what was the best game never made? I don't know, actually, because I don't remember.
We get to play it.
I don't
Actually.
remember games
the
that have
reason I
been
brought up that
cancelled.
whole
but-
narrative distance combat thing is because I think it is the great unsolved problem.
Yeah,
Because
but I think
it comes down to some hard restrictions of what games can
Yeah.
do meaningfully.
Hopefully, I think we'll see getting close to that. Maybe not. I don't think we'll see any kind of resolution to it in the next decade. I'd probably put my money
I
on
think the
it.
games that start to solve it will look a lot at first like sort of, one of those chat AI text adventure things. You know what I mean? Like, as those sorts of things become more advanced. But I do think games need to find a way of generating problems for the player intelligently on the fly.
I mean, sim games do this. Things like Prison Architect is a good example of a game which allows you, which makes you think about space and people and things and dynamic situations and strategy, but in a way which doesn't necessitate combat. And I think maybe you could find games which incorporate sim element. I think I might have talked about this on a podcast before. Have I mentioned The Force, a police fly on the wall?
No, you haven't actually.
You sure? That's
I
the
don't-
thing I
I'm not
bang a
familiar
lot
with
about
this.
in the pub. So the pub and podcast are basically the same thing in my memory space.
Hand in ours. But no, I'm pretty sure I haven't had you talk about it before. So.
Okay, so The Force is a Channel 4 documentary, which is really good. Fly on the Wall documentary about a police force. And I usually hate Fly on the Wall documentaries, but actually this is one of the most gripping hours of television you'll ever see. And it's not only gripping, but it's really heartening because the police force are just really methodical and sensible and extremely competent. And they're chasing down this murderer of this horrendous crime, just like something so horrendous. It's actually kind of really suited for kind of the tabloid, what's the phrase? Help me out. Sensationalism, yeah, and things like that. And, the kind of things that you'd see being used on Midsummer Murders and stuff like that. And you think, well, that probably doesn't really happen. It does happen. And they track this murderer down. But it's the most kind of interesting, methodical way of conducting an operation. It's not just like a PI or a single detective going over somewhere and walking a crime scene, as in LA Noire. It wouldn't suit that kind of game structure. It would have to be you have this hub of activity and all these other little ants being sent out to do kind of footwork and collecting little bits of information over here and collecting stuff over there. And I think you could set up a kind of dynamic system where you could generate crimes which would be in a game, obviously not in reality, generate crimes which would be, interesting and problematic and different each time. I'd like to see a game like that. Watch The Force, guys. It's really great.
Go home and do that now. Well, the thing that I always bang on about in subject when this comes up is Mask, which isn't dynamic, it's scripted, but it gives you a large enough possibility space and only lasts 15 minutes, so that you only on any single playthrough see a certain chunk of that. And as you go through and try different options, Mask is a game where I've talked about this in the podcast so many times, I'm sorry, but you play a guy who's the business manager of a company that does fashion designs, and you're putting on a fashion show, and you need the money in order to be able to afford to put on your next show. And in order to get the money, you have to ask your wife's boss, and you suspect that your wife is having an affair with him, and then your best friend is murdered. And based on how you play this, you can end up in jail having shot a guy, or you can end up divorced, or you can end up solving the mystery, or you can end up discovering that you've got a long lost son. And what it does is, like, it's really soapy, but it gives you a kind of story and experience and a sense of control in the game that you don't get from most games, but also it's not about just shooting people. It's, you're actually interacting with this game narrative and this game world, which is like Neighbours more than it is like Die Hard, and that's really rare. And related to your thing, Martin, to answer KP, because the question is slightly different in what's your dream concept for a game that hasn't been tried in the past. One of my dream games would be a kind of detective games, because I'm nuts for detective fiction and crime fiction and pulp noir stories and that kind of thing. And it's just games haven't done it particularly well because a detective skill set is sort of similar to the kind of action heroes that you get in games, but different enough that it doesn't know how to deal with a lot of other stuff. And the games that have tried it, like L.A. Noire, have done a shockingly terrible job of it.
Well, it's odd. It's like actually their ambitions for that game and all the systems in it seem pretty sensible. It's just that they didn't work. It's odd. It's like they had this conversation thing where you had to judge the emotions on the face, motion captured face of the person you're talking to, and yet the responses that you had available to you just didn't match up in any way to the kinds of things that your detective would then say, and they were really ambiguous terms anyway. Like I don't know, it was like question or push.
I think
I
think there are interesting mechanical problems inherent to this. Like, for example, so detective fiction is all about having information. I will bang on about the information again, but only briefly. But because I think it's absolutely integral to this. I just don't think you can understand why these games don't work until you understand the concept of concept of information and understanding and the transference of information. Because the mechanic is you're asked to monitor facial expressions and respond to them. However, there's a massive disconnect between the game's understanding and the players, because the game can give you a set of options with which to respond to the information it's giving you, but it does not know the intent behind. It does not know what you've seen.
Games never realise that you might be bluffing. This is the problem. When it gives you an option and it says, threaten this guy because you'd say it's, accuse the guy's mother, accuse the suspect's mother of murder. You might not think that, but the game will punish you then for it, for making a wrong accusation. But you think, but I'm trying to check this guy up.
I think that's a manifestation of the problem rather than the problem itself. I think the problem itself is that, your only way of interacting with the game is to tell the game what you would like to do, right? You can't tell the game what you know. That's a really big difference, because if the game put a list of things on the screen saying, which of these things do you know, it would ruin it, right?
Yeah.
You can't do that. It doesn't work. So the game therefore has to guess what you know based on what you do, which is...
Well, except Eleanor does have that, because it gives you kind of quizzes every now and again about the clues that you've picked up, and it's like multiple choice. Is that right? I think I'm remembering it right.
I think so.
But it's a slightly different...
Was the blanket red?
Yeah.
But again, and even then that problematizes things, presumably. But the point I'm saying is that in order for the game to satisfyingly respond to your intuitive sense of what's going on, it unfortunately has to kind of break it to ask, right? It's a bit like conversing with a person, where if you're not sure you're on the same page, it does actually ruin things to go, seriously, what do you mean? You know what I mean? I don't understand. And that's why these discrepancies happen. It's because games haven't figured out a smart way of doing that, because it seems like one of these unsurmountable problems. And until you can solve that, until you can solve the creation of challenge through conversation in a way that takes into account the information the player has or thinks they have, you'll have people shooting each other with guns. Because,
Point and click route to drama. That's what it is. Instant drama. Click.
Yeah, exactly. Chekhov's guns. All of Chekhov's guns. Oh man, I totally play a video game version of Hedda Gabler. Sorry.
I was just we should wrap up shortly, but the other insurmountable problem that I'd like games to solve is that I want the EVE Online style multiplayer game which isn't set in space. I want the MMO which isn't about scripted fetch quests and stuff like that. I want the one which is player driven, set in a city. And I hope that World of Darkness is going to be that game, or at least try to be that game, because a lot of people I think that's a game that everyone wants, which is what they ask. And I think just there's the people just haven't tried to make that, because it's the amount of content is huge.
It's not even the amount of content, it's the systems and getting people to play it, because everyone wants to be the hero. No one wants to be
But I don't know that that's necessarily true.
The manifestly is from the fate of every game that has done this in the past.
Star Wars Galaxies. I did some of it, and I know you love that game. And although an awful lot of people, and lots of games have done it, have done some amount of it. But Star Wars Galaxies, not everyone wanted to be a Jedi. A lot of people wanted to be a Jedi, and that game put a lot of people off because it made it difficult for you to become one. And they thought that was the problem with their game because it wasn't popular enough, and therefore, in order to get the kind of numbers they wanted financially, they had to change the nature of the game. But there were a lot of people that were okay with being, I am a bartender, I am a dancer in the bar, this is my life, and I will role play this thing.
Extent. I mean, bear in mind, I did play a lot of that game, and that wasn't strictly true. Like, they had to start incentivizing those professions died out almost totally until they changed the way combat works and the kind of what people saw as the actual progression of the game, which admittedly, due to problems, was Jedi. Because Jedi was hard, it was seen as the end game. And so things like the support professions like doctor, cantina, dancer, chef, and so on, were all kind of sort of tweaked and changed so that they would all be essential to combat success because of the buffs you would get from them. And so a lot of people had a non-combat profession as a secondary profession. So you'd be a bounty hunter and a dancer. So you could buff yourself, for example, and save a little bit of money. Like, they undercut the entire system, even by maybe even having combat there. But I think that game would have died if it hadn't been there and there hadn't been this sense of the end game and people hadn't been reaching over hero status. Seriously, I was in that role-playing community for like 3 years. The amount of people whose backstory was exactly this. I'm a sexy dancer. I'm also a dark Jedi, but right now I'm a bounty hunter. Like, you know...
Everyone, I suppose it's a thing of everyone wants to have the secret hidden...
and I seriously think it's funny because I mean, you know, I would be the person that I was going to say that, right, as my answer to this question. But I genuinely believe it's impossible, as opposed to the other one where I just think it's this interesting challenge.
But why wouldn't that work? I mean, it works for Eve, right? But why wouldn't it work in
Eve simplifies, man. This podcast's already gone for 2 hours and it's going to go.
Sorry.
But like, Eve simplifies the interaction between people to spaceships and commodities.
And everyone is a space pilot. Like, in other words, there is no, like, you cannot be the cook upon the space station.
Yeah, exactly.
But you can in Space Station 13, that top-down indie game, which is multiplayer, and everyone needs to fulfill a role, and you can be the ship's doctor, and that's still really important and dramatic, or you can be the bartender, and that's useful.
Based, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But I wonder if, like, can't that be expanded? Can, you know, if the game systems are interesting enough and you are still important within your little part of those game systems, isn't that compelling enough that you don't need to be
your own? What happens if you decide not to play for a month? Like, this is the thing. The nature of online games creates artificial problems that then have, you know, that don't exist in a regular world, right? You talk about creating a persistent world. If the real world was a persistent MMO, crazy emergent game thing, we would have to have policies in place to help society if all of the policemen left because a new WoW expansion came out. Right? No, this is why these things don't ultimately fit together, and it's why mechanics start to merge. Right? This is why every chef is then also a policeman. Because people double up, people fill gaps in society, and it just kind of becomes kind of messy and complicated. And the kind of the sense of identity you're talking about, the "I am the chef" appeal, if that wears off after 20 minutes, you're done. You know what I mean? That role diminishes until either no one does it or it changes until it's interchangeable with something else.
But that's. Yeah, I mean, it's dependent on those systems being good. Okay, so if you decide not to play for a month, what happens then? Age of Wushu, which is an MMO, of not any great quality by what I've heard, but when you log off, your character continues to exist within that world. The computer just takes it over and does
your crafting profession.
Yeah, and does basic things, and so it gives the game more of a sense of a world, and your character is persistent in it.
That's a good idea.
If you're a chef, then there we go. You continue still cooking the meals even when you're not there, but you're not involved in the more dramatic, you know, events on the ship or anything like that. Your character's basically safe. And so I understand that this problem. Right. I understand that this problem is incredibly difficult, which is why no one's done it. It's not just the content problem. It is that, you know, I'm asking them to create the holodeck or some version of it.
Yeah, but not only you want them to create the game that you want to live in, but that loads of other people also want to live in. Because if they don't live in it, your enjoyment fails.
It's just it also is like, how big does this actually need to be? Isn't it okay to have a game like, could it be session based up to the point where it only has 200 people? And I'm conscious of the fact that the cleaners are outside the door.
Yeah. No, it's fine. This is the most interesting topic in the entire world. I mean, this is the thing. I think maybe a smaller session based thing could work. I mean, I've said this before. Actually, I'm not going to say this on the podcast because it is literally the best idea I've ever had, and I might actually want to do it. So I'm not. But I think there are ways of solving this for smaller groups of players. But it's always a trade-off and it's always a compromise. And there comes a point when very, very smart designers sit down and look at it and go, "This is something we just have to solve for good." And that's, people maybe lament unfairly World of Warcraft's popularity. One thing I do regret, I think, is it is Blizzard's very, very brutal solving of the emergence problem, or the what happens if there aren't enough players around problem, or what happens if you're playing this by yourself problem. The thing that problem of what happens if our world, what if someone buys our game in 5 years and can't really enjoy it because its time was 3 years before then. You solve that by cutting it out. Just get rid of it. Make a game that's played completely playable because it's totally scripted. And that's sort of heartbreaking, a huge shame. But at the same time, you can completely understand why they did it, because people got to eat. And making a game that's built to fail is kind of romantic. But I'm not ready to love again. So, rant over.
It needs a kind of Tarn Adams style figure who just, like with Dwarf Fortress, just says that he doesn't think that game will be finished for another 20 years, and he's already been working on it for like 10 now. And it's just, it needs that kind of person. And when the metaverse does get here, it's going to be an ASCII. But, I can live with that if I get that game. So
some great mods back in the day did a lot of these things.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you for listening to PC Gamer Podcast.
We love each other, really. And please, if you have children, just give them a hug.
Don't drown them. We shall now go off into the west and diminish.
And
remain Galadriel.